What's going on, everybody? Patrick Hunter here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. We're doing something a little bit different today, boxing related, history related, but film related. Because, I mean, it's not, this is something that a lot of people were doing in the middle of the pandemic. Pandemic was hitting, and then people were like, oh, let's watch movies and review movies. Well, I don't know. I guess we're just late to the party, a little bit. But nonetheless, dude, one of our favorite boxing movies, The Great White Hype. I'm here to discuss that with my boy Aris Pina. It's gonna be a lot of fun today. Aris, what is up, dude?
Hey, what's going on, man? Yeah, we're here to talk about one of the greatest movies, and for me at least, one of the best movies I've ever watched. I've watched it. I, I don't know how many times I've watched it now, but like it just holds up over the years. And we decided to start talking about this because we noticed it was streaming on Tubi. Shout out to Tubi again for all their content. Well, because like I don't get paid by Tubi, but I always like to plug them for what it is. Like that fucking app, it's
They
good.
got
Like.
some bangers on there, dude. Like
They really do.
unexpectedly.
You know what I mean? Like they really like all the movies that you've never seen stream, but you always loved as a kid, like random shit like No Holds Barred or High School High, which I was mentioning before we started recording. I haven't watched in over a decade. That's streaming on right now, or a bunch of other random movies. Like they have all those. They stream a bunch of like old true crime shows that you can just watch on 24 hours on a loop. The boxing channels. I absolutely love the app. You know what I mean? I watch it more than I watch actual television. So. Shout out to Tubi for that. And right now they have the Great White Hype on it.
Yeah, dude. Similarly, like I have a fairly narrow interest when it comes to like reality TV. Pretty much the only thing that I like is like Hell's Kitchen and shit like that. And they have like all the fucking Hell's Kitchen on
Yeah.
that bitch. And another thing that I fucking watched on there somewhat recently was that the Spartacus show. I watched
Mhm.
that shit back in the day when it was on Stars, and the shit was fucking great. And I rewatched it recently, and shit was still fucking good. It's ridiculous. They should call that shit Spartacus Blood and Porn, because that's literally all the fucking show is. It's great. But we're here to talk about the Great White Hype, dude, and it's so fucking funny because you and I both equally enjoy this movie, probably more than it deserves, but still, it's like I don't know. I just see so much of the you can't view boxing that seriously most of the time. Like obviously you and I both take it seriously. We study the history and read about it and do all that kind of stuff pretty seriously and we don't fuck around. But at the same time, the sport itself is so absurd. And if you've watched or listened to some of especially like the true crime shows we've done and stuff like that, it's like you can't listen to this stuff and just be like this is stuff that actually happens and how serious it is. Some of the stuff that happens in boxing regularly is so ridiculous. I feel like doing serious films, for instance, about boxing, that's why they often just don't work, or they don't work how like you think they're going to work when you put them down on paper, and that you almost have to treat this shit like a comedy. And that's why for me this movie fucking works, because there's so much absurd shit and dumb shit in boxing that you just laugh right along with it and be like, "Yep, I remember that exact fucking thing happened," even as dumb as and as like stereotypical as it seems in the movie. You know what I mean?
1,000%. And the thing that makes this movie so great is that, like, yeah, like you said, there's a ton of stereotypes that they kind of like jump upon and they exaggerate to like the ninth degree. But when you still watch it though, and especially I think what makes it more like good for people like us is because, like you said, we've been involved in the sport for so long as observers, working involved in the business, working involved in just in every like aspect and just following along its history and all that, that we understand this business. We understand the sport and the ins and outs of it, more so than I guess the person that just enjoys movies as opposed to like really watching boxing. So watching it in that from that perspective, it makes it that much better because we've seen all this stuff happen. Like I said, the movie exaggerates it, but it's still the fact of the matter is that like a lot of this shit, if you really think about it, could actually be happening in boxing. And that's what makes it so fucking funny. And then the characters that are portrayed in it just makes it even better along with it. It's just everything about it is just perfect.
It really is, dude. A lot of the funniest things in it, and like you just kind of said, and we were talking about earlier too. Um, if you're not a boxing fan, or if you're even just kind of like a casual boxing fan, I'm sure you'll see some things in the movie, and you'll be like, oh, that's obviously supposed to be Don King or something like that. There's some really obvious sorts of things in the movie, but there's also a lot of really small jokes and small sort of like subtle things that they slip in there that are just fucking great. And so that's one of the things that I think really makes it fun is that if you're a really hardcore boxing fan, you can tell also that the movie was made by somebody who's a boxing fan and who can appreciate all these dumb little things.
1,000%. It's like someone like you said that actually really knows the sport and like followed along. And then when you see the cast of characters and the people, cameoing themselves in the movie, as we'll get into in a little bit, you'll realize too that yeah, this guy did his homework and everything worked out well with it. And to keep in mind too, what makes this movie kind of stand out is that up until this point, there wasn't really many comedic movies made about boxing. Like everything about, movies made on the sport were more or less at that point. There were a couple of exceptions. For instance, there was the movie in 1979, I forget the name of it, with Ryan O'Neal and Barbara Streisand. You know what I'm talking about? I think it was called The Main Event, actually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, that movie was not good. I remember watching it as a kid because it was just one of those that were kind of like shown on television sometimes and all that, and that took a more humorous approach to the sport than others. More of the norm was like the Rocky series, Fat City, um,
Yeah.
stuff like that. Was it like The Harder They Fall or something? I don't know.
Yeah, that's probably one of the more famous ones too. And there are a
Yeah.
lot of like especially in like the 40s, 50s and part of the 60s, there was a pretty hard lean into like the noir
Yeah, totally.
type of stories and crime stories and stuff like that or a lot of
Ali, I'm sorry. Even Ali starred as himself in that movie The Greatest in like the 70s.
yeah, and he also had a pretty good appreciation for the stage play that was turned into a movie with George Earl Jones, The Great White Hope.
Oh
So,
yeah, that was a great one.
which is
Bro Jones.
one of, well, yeah, sorry, James, yeah, James Earl.
He said George Earl Jones.
Yeah, it's like his fucking grandson or something. But fucking one of the few instances, in my opinion, where kind of serious subject matter or whatever was actually they did a good job portraying that on screen. I mean, and I've said this before on the show. I'll repeat it forever. I don't normally like boxing movies, dude. Like they do you can't capture like like it's so tough to capture a boxing movie that's serious like some of the best ones you've already named already and like we've only named like maybe like 10 total. Fat City, great flick. um what's the one Robert Redford
Not the champ or something.
no it'll come to me in a sec. But The Harder They Fall is not a bad flick. But again, like a lot of those kind of like noir type of boxing movies or that involve boxing, a lot of them had like a really similar storyline or really similar kind of like, oh, it's involved with crime or like the mob type of shit and they're paying guys off to take a fall type of thing. Or they take the like a story about Rocky Graziano or Primo Carnera and like these kinds of figures where there's a really stereotypical type of lean with the stories. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, but they covered a lot of that shit already into like the 50s and 60s. And so a lot of the films made after that, it's really hit and miss. Rocky, the original Rocky is, obviously a classic, but one of those flicks that like in my opinion doesn't like age super great. Like it's not a bad movie whatsoever, but just doesn't have yeah, I mean, some of the acting's kind of wooden, kind of weird. But anyway, I'm trying to think of like some straight up comedies that have been done about boxing, but there really haven't been a whole lot of them.
It's interesting though because like you said, the Rocky films, that once that franchise started taking off, other boxing flicks weren't, as prominent. 1980 obviously had Raging Bull, and that takes precedence as one of the premier fight flicks in history. And And, you know, it's not so much a boxing film as it is just like a memoir of Jacob LaMotta's life and all that. But all in all, it's known as one of the greatest fight flicks and one of the greatest movies of all time. But the Rocky movies in the 80s were basically, I mean, unless I'm missing something here, because I was not really a major movie aficionado like that, but with the advent of like, you know, the popularity of martial arts, especially, you know, with Bruce Lee and then moving on until the 80s, and then like the action flicks that you had with Van Damme and doing other things like that, mainly the boxing flicks you saw were the Rocky series. You know, when Stallone decided to do that as opposed to like doing Rambo or something like that. But the 90s, things started changing ever so slightly. And in terms of like fight flicks and in terms of like how they were being portrayed as well. Like 1989, there was Harlem Nights, not a fight flick whatsoever, but there was, you know, a lot of boxing related moments into it. For one, Roberto Duran makes a cameo in it as one of Richard Pryor's bodyguards. You know, remember that part when he goes up, he was like, "Hey, you want me to kick his ass?" And he was like, and he called him. He used him as his real name. No, Roberto, no kicky his ass tonight. And then he walked. And the basis of the movie was built around the heavyweight championship in a big fight. And I think I haven't watched that movie in a long time, but there was like, you know, gambling involved and politics, stuff like that. So that, you know, that was a boxing related movie, even though it wasn't a boxing movie, if that makes sense. And then by the 90s, these started having more, you know, like boxing central fight flicks because like Rocky 5 happened and that was such an abomination that people just kind of written that off right after that, you know, but soon after you had one and this is before the Great White Hype, you had excuse me, the Gladiator. Now everybody mentions whenever I mention Gladiator as a film, everybody goes right to the Russell Crowe, excuse me,
Like,
the
understandably, but
totally, yeah. And because what's the first thing you're gonna think of? Gladiator, him. But a lot of people don't realize, wait a minute, there's a boxing movie called Gladiator with Cuba Gooding Jr. and who was that? Dennehy?
yeah,
Brian.
Brian Dennehy, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not gonna front. And the the other guy too, who was a famous actor who was in a ton of stuff, who since passed away, and he played as Dennehy's like sleazy little cohort.
Oh
Um,
man, I'd have to look it up because there's like a handful of like kind of like smaller character actors
well,
and
I'm
shit.
looking it up right now because I need to know.
Oh yeah, like Robert Loggia plays the
Yeah,
dude who's
Robert Loggia.
yeah, that's who plays the guy who's kind of like the mentor, like but yeah. Aussie Davis, he plays like the old trainer.
Hmm.
Fuck yeah, fucking there's some like a whole bunch of people if you go look at like the
Yeah, Robert Loggia was a really good character as Pappy Jack. He was such a shrewd little asshole. He carried an actual like you know full on phone around him in one of these places, and he knew it. You know, and he always he had a little bodyguard around him that would give him like candy bars and stuff. He played a good little character that you would imagine that was like kind of like a Blinky Palermo-ish, you know, underscore hoodlum type. But so you had the Gladiator, you had the movie Gladiator, and then there was also Digstown, starring
James
what
Woods.
James and Louis Gossett.
Yeah, Louis Gossett Jr. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, you know, boxing movies were starting to come around a little bit more, and also at the same time, HBO making their own independent films had the mini like movie documentary slash documentary movies on Don King and
Yep.
Mike Tyson, which both had favorable reviews. I mean, I never saw the Tyson one because my parents didn't let me watch that as a kid, but the Don King one I definitely watched, and I remember like Vin Rhames played a great Don King, like very well done, and so that led us all into eventually this movie, you know, what comes about. And what made this one stand out amongst all the other ones I just mentioned was that even though those were not just like straight up sad boxing, like you said, noir films or whatever, you know, they were veering more into like what the 90s were and everything like that. This movie was a straight up comedy and kind of like a spoof on the sport in general, but one that we could all relate to.
Yeah, totally. And on top of that, like you just said, like a bunch of the movies that we mentioned are like they weren't really like boxing movies. They were
Yeah.
movies where like boxing was kind of part of the plot or something like that, but it
Except for
wasn't
Gladiator.
boxing.
Gladiator was like a boxing movie, even though it
Yeah.
was like central, underground
And,
bullshit. But
and yeah, and it's like and that and Digstown to some degree too. It's like they play like fast and loose with a lot of the shit. You know what I mean? Like they're like go ahead and wrap my hands, and they're wrapping it with some fucking like nail type shit, and then
yeah,
like putting the nails inside gloves that are worn down, and like you already know that like in real life if you put any of that type of shit on your hand, you're breaking your fucking wrist, and like the cops are coming. Like there are no like underground boxing rings, like the type of shit that happens is like that shit gets broken up within like a month by fucking Vice and shit, and
that's
like
true.
so they're playing like fast and loose with a lot of this shit just for the sake of entertainment, which is fine. And the Great White Hype does too. Like a lot of the process is like oversimplified and shit like that, and a lot of it's like overly stereotypical, but that's also why it works as a comedy.
Totally. And so like the premise of the movie, it starts out with Damon Wayans is the heavyweight champion of the world, James the Grim Reaper Roper. And undefeated, like I think he said he was like 36-0 at 36 knockouts. And just the dominating champ as it is. And so brings you to the MGM Grand, which makes sense because by the mid 90s, that was the premier place in boxing. And Mike Tyson had made his home there, and Don King essentially made their home there for all his big fights. And just another routine title defense. But right away, like you said, like it's even though it's a boxing film, it just kind of takes on a ridiculousness because in the fight, um, Wayne's is Roper, James the Grim Reaper Roper is over there fighting his opponent, and he lands like an 18 punch combination. The guy has his hands down, and he's just boom, 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 boom until the guy just collapses at the feet of Richard Steele, who was like the central referee throughout this movie. Which makes sense too, because Steele, I mean, was like the premier. I mean, besides Mills Lane, who else was known as like the top referee around that time?
Well, and on top of that, Tyson Holyfield 2 hadn't happened yet. So Mills hadn't like
Good
exploded,
call.
you know what I'm saying? So
Good
like he was
call.
still
Good call.
famous, but not to the degree like a couple years later.
Yeah, Richard Steele was still
And
that name.
and and love him or hate him, because dude, at this point, Richard Steele was getting loud boos at shows still. Remember? Like they'd be
Absolutely.
like referee Richard Steele, and people be like, "Fuck you, bro!" Like, dude, Chavez Taylor was fucking years ago, guys. Goddamn,
He would just sit there and he was just like,
poor fucking guy.
and I mean, the reality of the situation is, like you said this before, if anybody actually approached him and tried to step to him, Steele would have knocked him out. He was a former legit pro fighter, I think a California light heavyweight champion. But anyways, he just plays as the referee in this movie. And Samuel L. Jackson plays as the Don King, and amazing in my opinion as
Yeah.
Sultan, right? Well, fucking Reverend Sultan.
Yeah, I think yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I can't remember what his first name is in the
I think
movie,
it's
but
Fred. It's pretty
you could
sure
be
it's
right. Yeah.
And I don't know, it just from there it just like what we said, everything starts falling into place with it. It's just hilarious.
Okay, yeah, Fred Sultan. Yeah, I think I don't even know if they call him by his first name in the movie, but
They do like well, what's the guy that we're about to bring up in a couple of minutes? He ends up calling him by his first name while he's like recording him.
oh yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. Dude, there's a lot of fucking great exposition in that first scene too. And for anybody who's like listening or watching, like expo what? Exposition is like telling part of the story or the backstory without explicitly telling you. Like for instance, in Star Wars, the exposition would be in that first thing, where the fucking text starts scrolling down the screen. That's the exposition. They're just telling you instead of doing that in this movie and saying, enter the first scene, heavyweight champion James Roper. Instead of doing that, they're just showing you. And so they depict James Roper as like, he's dominant and he's almost like frustrated because this is so easy and it's so routine. He's knocking guys out too easily. Like this is, come on, give me somebody I could beat type of shit. And in this first scene, like, everybody's happy, everybody's cheering him on, blah, blah, blah. But then they go to immediately after the fight, and it's like, that's where like the issues start, and that's where the whole fucking setup for the entire movie happens, where it's like I said, this is too easy for the champ. He's undefeated. There's nobody that can challenge him, and because there's nobody that can challenge him, this has all become too routine. It's not making enough money, and so you start kind of looking. All right, they're leaning on the stories, the recent stories of Mike Tyson, Riddick Bowe. A lot of these recent heavyweight champions at the time, because this was in '96, probably filmed in like '95. Uh, so the recent heavyweight champions and the most recent ones would have been Bowe, Holyfield, Moore, Foreman, Tyson. Those guys are generally what they're looking for these kinds of like traits of the heavyweight champion here.
Oh, 1,000%. And the whole idea is that there is, and one other thing that they kind of touch on too is that there is a number one contender out there who's very worthy and has been calling out for the champion a lot, a guy by the name of Marvin Shabazz. And he's managed by Jamie Foxx. And Jamie Foxx, I looked up his name in the movie, and I'm not even sure if he's actually like mentioned by name in the movie either. Like, I'm sure he is at one point, but it's like, it's a different it's a hard name to pronounce anyway, so I'm just gonna call him by Jamie Foxx. But Jamie, manages the obvious number one contender who's clearly being ducked, not so much by Damon Wayans, because he even says at one point, I want to fight the number one contender, fuck this. And but he's being ducked by Sultan, the essential Don King. And so that's another part that's kind of funny to be touched on. But while they're having this meeting after in this powwow talking about how, well, this isn't working, we lost 50% from the last heavyweight title fight, 75% from the last one before that. No one's buying into this and blah 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 blah. Blah. And he can't pay Damon Wayans, James Roper, what he's supposed to owe him. And so at this point, Roper is getting pissed off about this, and obviously he makes a power play and he's like, "Listen, I'm done with this shit. Unless you give me what you owe me, I'm done." And yada yada yada. So Samuel Jackson, I mean, I gotta call them by their actual movie names. Sultan comes up and he's like, fuck, he does what Don King would essentially, I can imagine Don King has done this countless times at one point or another. All right, guys, give the champ what he wants. You know what I mean? Let's take off our rings, take these guys, sell off my Rolls Royces, clear the mansion out, and then you see Carl, Dad, you don't have to do this. And I can see him like running up to who would hold him up for money like that back then? I don't know.
Oh, it would have been somebody like fucking Tim Witherspoon or
That's what
something
I'm,
like that.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like somebody who was like not really fucking, commanding that kind of money, but technically contractually owed, you know what I mean? That type of shit.
Or just like somebody, or even somebody big. Like I can imagine, let's see, like a big name that he had back then. Maybe even Tyson, for that matter. Or like one of his other heavyweight champions during that time, where he was
Well,
like, "Nah,
there
come on,
are
you
the
owe me this shit."
stories. There
Yeah,
are the stories about Tyson, like, fucking like
roughing them up.
being like,
Yeah.
"Hey, bitch, like, what the fuck you think you're doing?" Like, so, I mean, I obviously wasn't there, but there are those stories about Tyson getting up in his face and shit.
I could possibly imagine Tyson being like, you give me what you owe me right now. And Don's like, I can't do that. We didn't make this much. And then Carl coming up, come on, Mike, do you really think you gotta let my
You
dad do
destroy my dad.
He loves you. You know what he's done to you? And Don and Mike like, I don't give a fuck. And Don's like, fine, let him keep it. And all like I can imagine that whole scene.
Yes.
No, and that's exactly what happens in this movie, is where Roper is holding him up and was like, yo, give me what you owe me, and Sultan is basically like, well, okay, fine, I'm do what you gotta do. But then eventually he starts pulling up and he was like, no, 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 I know what we need. And he was like, I know how we're gonna make all this type of money. And then initially, um, James Roper was like, no, I want the number one contender. And that's when Sultan was like, no, fuck you. That's when he starts playing the power play where Don King, I could say, doing the same thing. Because even then, he still has mind control. Fuck you. I own you. And then he makes him sit down and he tells him, we need you to find you a white heavyweight. And that's how this movie
Yeah. Wh-
starts from there. Yeah.
Which is obviously also another way of like showing that like this guy's a snaky motherfucker. Like he's gonna be all like, huh, huh, in 1 second and be like, no, shut the fuck up. I own you. Like he's clearly like, there's no fucking he will not go, there's nothing too low for this fucking guy. But
No.
that's the whole point. And fucking but also right in between there's the post-fight press conference scene too that is also great because it's like that's one of the smaller scenes. It only lasts like maybe a minute or two but it's one of the smaller scenes that really shows that like somebody's been watching boxing and paying attention to boxing beyond just the fights. They go up and have the post fight presser, and like Samuel L. Jackson, Sultan's all he brings up like four different fucking like deities. He's just like Jehovah and God and fucking Muhammad and all this stuff. He just starts like just shouting off fucking random names and shit, which is a totally a fucking Don King type of thing where it's anything situational. Like, oh, I'm with Puerto Ricans, Viva Puerto Rico, like, or if he's with a bunch of Polish people, he'll start fucking shouting Polish, like whatever it is. And that's the kind of guy that Sultan is. So it's obvious that they're, leaning into the stereotype, but then also they have in that scene a couple of the guys like Burt Sugar. I You mentioned him earlier, and I guess I had just never noticed him in the movie before. But Tim Kawakami, the dude who wrote for L.A. Times for a number of years, um, and I mean, I think there are probably some other background characters that were actual writers, but they just don't get named or really shown in the movie. But everybody else is like it's part of the press scrum and the press area of this post fight press conference. And then Sultan's fucking goons, which are fucking hilarious, by the way, start shouting at him and shit. And Burt Sugar stands up. This is a press conference. It's a press conference, like which is also hilarious because this is like the '90s was the king fucking era of people punching each other and tackling each other and wrestling each other at press conferences. Like we could bring up fucking a dozen fucking instances right now. So that's just another one of those things where it's like, somebody's a boxing fan.
1,000%. I love that. I actually love that scene actually because, like you said, there are a little like Easter eggs of people that you'll recognize in the audience and at the press conference amongst the press if you follow boxing back then. Burt Sugar obviously was the main central piece because he gets mentioned. He has a bunch of one-liners throughout the film whenever he's a part of it, and he gets mentioned too, like throughout little intimate parts of it as well. But like. That one part, yeah, it's hilarious. That's the first scene you see him in because those are Roper's lackeys. Those like three or four guys, those are James Roper's guys that just kind of follow him on his little beck and call. And every major fighter back then definitely had an entourage that just would do anything, wipe your feet, do all that type of shit. Tommy Hearns was notorious for having one of the major big entourages back in the 80s, of over like 30 or 40 guys that would just snap their fingers. He would do whatever. Muhammad Ali, same thing. Um, you know, Mike Tyson, obviously, like countless people. So
Bo.
Bo, psh. So I mean, they were just kind of bouncing off of that. In fact, they kind of like undermined it a little bit by only having like three main guys follow them.
Yeah, I
Oh,
know. They just couldn't have that many. They had to keep it,
yeah.
like movie friendly. You know what I mean?
But those three guys were so over the top and perfect that they just made it seem like there was like 40. They made it seem like there were like 40 of them. You know what I mean? But yeah, they were just like, oh, Bert Champ, da da da, like yelling and all that. And you hear Bert Champ, that's like you said, this is a press conference. And they yell, man, shut up, man. I don't want to hear that. Like there's back and forth. And yeah, Bert was perfect in that role because like we've talked about Bert a lot on the show. And, over the years, a lot of the stories that he would tell get called into question for like, various things because he was a guy that would just put up a lot of, he's the one who heard the same stories and his Calvin could push the same ones and it just gets portrayed as truth over the years. But so regardless of calling, his credentials in terms of that stuff, the guy had an amazing personality, and that's what kind of sold him to, oh, you would always see him on television for documentaries and everything like that. And that's what made him perfect for this role too. Like he didn't have a major role in it, but for the parts he was in, he was brilliant, getting argumentative with this, the way he would question things and all that. And the way they portrayed him, he was like the central figure of like, the journalist of boxing at that time. Which in that to that degree, he was still like a prominent figure. So well, they weren't that far off.
Right. Yeah. He was more kind of like an ambassador than an actual journalist or
At that
anything
point,
like
yeah.
that. But also just kind of like a stereotypical, but also like quintessential folk figure, something like that. He had the fedora, the fucking cigar, and sometimes the fedora with a little card in it type shit. And that's a stereotypical figure in any sort of press situation for sports and especially for boxing. And he was perfect in that exact fucking position. And so, going from the press conference to this little kind of discussion, and they start having it again, there's like these representations or kind of amalgams, which is just like a whole bunch of characters rolled up into one, and a bunch of these people, like for instance, I think that Corbin Burnson is supposed to represent the dudes who owned the fucking MGM properties at the time.
Yeah.
And then also, like, I think Steve Wynn was starting to fucking do shit in Vegas around this time. And then there was also, I don't know how close any of those people were actually to boxing people, but Saul Kirshner, the big hotel magnate from South Africa, who we brought up on a totally different show, was good friends with Bob Arum. And so you have all these sorts of characters from boxing who are kind of rolled into one with Corbin Burnson's character, who's the owner of the MGM properties or whatever here. And he's the one kind of putting pressure on Sultan and going like, dude, we're not selling so well. Like, what are we going to do type of stuff. Because they're having to paper the crowd and like, give away comps and stuff like that, which is an actual thing in boxing and fucking an actual problem that we've encountered in the last few decades without question. And so in any case, this is when they start coming up with this entire plan. Like, what do we do? What do we need to do? And also, one of the great things about this scene where they're figuring out what it is they have to do is I can't remember her name off the top of my head. I'm about to look it up right now because I don't want to fucking be like, oh, that one lady. But I mean, she's fine. Don't get me wrong. Sally Richardson, her character's name's Bambi in the flick,
Mm.
and Cheech Marin plays a dude named Julio Escobar, which is like they couldn't come up with a more fucking like typical or stereotypical stupid fucking Latino name for a dude. And so he's obviously again like an amalgam for like Bob Lee, fucking Mauricio Suleiman.
Mm.
I don't know. I'm not sure who else was.
Especially the Bob Lee, like the way if you watch the film and you know the maneuverings of like the sanctioned body presidents, and especially in years to come too, this was almost like a foreboding to come of what you would see, like in terms of like the unraveling of the organizations and all their corruption stuff like that. But that the guy that like you said Julio Escobar played by Cheech, he really is, as you'll find out years later, like he really played like the Bob Lee character of just being like the underbelly and like the stuck up of being stuck up Don King's ass or whoever. And it's like a mixture between him and Jose Suleiman. I can't say I know that much about Gilberto Mendoza and his fuck ups, which I know there's a plenty of them as well, but like the two main guys and what we know about them, you can totally see the mannerisms of the
Yeah.
IBF and the BBC. Yeah.
And Paco Valcarcel like was maybe just a few years later, but he would also, a lot of the shit that was done similarly, and a lot of these guys were um also a lot of these organizations, almost all of them were either based out of for a while the WBA was based out of Argentina and then moved to Venezuela. The WBO is Puerto Rico, WBC is Mexico, and so point is, Cheech Marin's playing this fucking part to a T. For some reason, he's just got this lady like under his employ for what who knows who fucking knows an escort who knows, but that's the great thing is
That
she's
was
the
his
one.
assistant.
Yeah.
His assistant. I mean, listen,
Assisting what? Who knows?
all all weird sleazy people have an assistant at some point that they do whatever they're supposed to be doing.
And trust us, we've known weird, sleazy people in boxing. So we can confirm this shit. And that's the great part, though, is that she's the one who comes up with the plan, and she's the one who plants the seed for Sultan about who the last person to defeat James Roper was in the amateurs, which, again, is a trope that has been used in boxing on numerous occasions where there have been amateur. Whether it's been like an amateur rivalry or the last person to defeat so and so. A couple of years after this, for instance, they used the exact same thing again between Shane Mosley and Vernon Forrest, where Vernon Forrest held a couple wins over Shane Mosley in the amateurs, and they tried to play that up to promote the fight, etc. So that is something that they have actually done. And like I said, I think that it's hilarious and great that out of all these fucking sleazy characters who are all kind of angling for blah, 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 she's the one who comes up with the idea.
Well, and that what's brilliant about that whole scene in general is the fact that the thing that's like brilliant about that part in general is the fact that when they're doing that initially, she was over there like working like you said as Cheech's assistant, Julio Escobar, and they're watching videos trying to find his next prospective opponents. And they're watching a bunch of highlight videos of white heavyweights trying to find the next guy. And these are all real fights. That's the part about this, this one scene. So like they're watching them and they're watching one guy get knocked out and then another one, and they show about five different clips. And you and I, we were trying to figure out, and it's actually hilarious the way they like, they talk about some of these guys because they'll see one guy, they're like, "Oh man, look at him! Oh, roly poly, looks like he got struck. Oh, shit, man!" Wow, because it'll be like,
Yeah, because they're like basically it's like an audition tape. They're trying to
yeah,
figure out some white dude that they can bring in to look good but lose, basically.
exactly. And then watch these guys get knocked out, and they're just like, "Oh man!" And what they did brilliantly too in the movie is that they made like they definitely made a little bit more sound effects on the punches, so you hear pow, 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 and make noise. So you and I were trying to figure out. I think they showed, like I said, about five different clips, and we were trying to figure out the people, the white fighters that were getting knocked out in the clips, like who was being showcased there. And we were able to figure out three of them. One of them obviously was Tommy Morrison getting knocked out by Ray Mercer, and I think you and I both agree that was the first time we had actually ever seen that footage was through that movie. I had never seen that before.
I
You
mean, that's a
know,
pretty fucking violent knockout too. So that's the kind of knockout where like if my mom had seen that show on TV, she'd be like, "Oh, you know."
yeah. I definitely remember my mom definitely raised an eyebrow when she saw that. She was like, "Oh my God." And I had read about that, but like I didn't actually had never seen it before. And you got to consider too, 1996, you and I were fans, but like I'm not actively tape trading. I don't, they're not showing that fight
Right,
on replay on
exactly.
highlight videos, nothing like that on television. All I've ever seen is the VHS tapes I have
Or like
and
the
what,
cover of KO where
yeah,
Tommy was like,
exactly.
you know,
Totally. Or like, all I've ever seen is just what I've been able to watch on television or like a couple of VHS tapes, which didn't have that fight on it. So first time seeing that, and then seeing the up closeness of it, the way he was getting knocked out, I had never seen camera angles that close with someone getting bludgeoned like that. Made me think initially that it was fake and that was just a part of the movie. I was like, no way, they made that. They just did some, blah blah blah. Because I didn't know he got the fucking murk like that. I mean, that was mind blowing. And then finding out that was real because I saw that clip first. Then I saw the Ring magazine cover a couple of years later when I bought it at the Hall of Fame or something. And I remember seeing that cover and seeing that face, and I'm just kind of put two and two
you're
together.
like
And I'm
great
like,
white hype? What?
yeah, I'm like, oh my God, that was the real deal Holyfield. So Morrison was shown. And then the last clip they show is Tim Witherspoon knocking Dolph Lundgren lookalike Andrew
Yeah.
Eklund, which
Anders
they
Eklund
which
fucking
they actually called him too, because you hear Rev say it. Oh, looks like Dolph Lundgren. And then Witherspoon comes over. That was in 1989. So Eklund wasn't a bad fighter. He wasn't a particularly good fighter, but I mean, he was a guy that like he was big, strong, kind of awkward. Had a decent record at the time, so he was making a little bit of noise, at least to the point where like he could have been a fringe contender or something. But then Witherspoon rearranging his face like that kind of, put him out of commission. But then the other one that I was able to figure out the other night was a fight regarding Courage Shabalala. And so at one point during this clip, when they're showing the different clips, they have one part come up and you hear the analyst talking and they're going, a guy from South Africa, blah, blah. And so they think they're referencing the white guy because you hear Rev talk to Julio Escobar and he goes, South Africa? South Africa, Julio? Because, apartheid was still a thing back then and all that. And then all of a sudden you see Shabalala absolutely blast this poor guy into an orbit. And come to find out, the guy that he blasted wasn't a white guy at all or anything like that. He was a Mexican heavyweight named Marcos. I'd have to look up the name again, but he was a journeyman heavyweight from Mexico.
yeah, so he just had to look vaguely white, basically.
Exactly.
That's
And then the clips looking like that, like it looked close enough. Well, let me say his name. Hold up. It was I found this shit the other day, didn't I? We messaged each other a lot of crap, so hold up. Oh, right here. Marcos Gonzalez. 18 and 7. He was 18 and 17 after he finished his record. But the clip they showed was from like the Great Western Forum or whatever it was, somewhere in Cali. And Shabalala was when he was on the come up, he had a lot of highlight reel KOs. And before he got exposed on, I forgot what HBO pay-per-view it was, but he like ran out of gas and got knocked out by somebody. Brian Scott, I think it was. Um, he was looking like the real deal. And plus, you could have loved it. How can you not love that name, Courage Shabalala? So,
Dude, there were a lot of dudes who were a lot of dudes from a few different African countries. I mean, we've talked about this on a different show, but from a few different African countries that came up in like late 80s to like the late 90s or so. That a handful of Nigerian dudes, obviously Ike Ibeabuchi,
mhm.
Friday Ahunanya. There were a bunch of dudes who were
David Assequire,
a bunch of them, yeah. Aizon Rute, a dude who dudes who looked good too. They weren't like bad fighters whatsoever. It's just that they came up, I guess, fought some wrong dudes. I don't know.
totally. But they were showing those random clips. And then what makes another pivotal scene in this is that Bambi, she was like, "Hello, I got an opinion. I got an opinion." And that's when her boss, Julio Escobar, decides to be like, "Bitch, shut up and run the tapes." And she was like, "Oh, you want to fuck with me? I'm gonna walk out." And that's when Sultan runs over and was like, "Nah, nah, nah, hold up. Give us your idea." And she was like, "Well, the champ has only lost once, right?" "Yeah, when?" "As an amateur." "Okay, who gives a fuck? Who beat him?" And then you see Sultan smiling because he sees the idea where she's going with. And all the other lackeys over there are just like, "I don't know, who gives a fuck? Well, who do you lose to, his mother?" Blah, 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 blah. And then he was like, "No, Terry Conklin." And he was like, "Who's that?" "White dude from Chicago, blah, blah, blah." And then that's when Sultan goes, "Guess what? You know what? You work for me now." Because that shows that he has power. And in a subtle way, it shows that he has power over, the fucking ratings chairman. And Julio Escobar was like, "No, no, no, she works for me." And he was like, "Julio, she works for me." Which means that Julio works for him too. And in, the ways of boxing, Don King controlled Jose Suleiman and he controlled Bob Lee and what they wanted and what he wanted them to do. So that was like another like homage to that in its own way.
And also showing that a lot of these dudes who were, and I mean, we're not really on the sides of promoters and managers. Like, I mean, you and I as
Yeah.
people, like, we're not necessarily against them either, but I think we recognize them for what they are, and that is a bunch of people who are not participating and not putting their health and long-term, well-being on the line and making about as much money, if not more so, than the actual fighters, and a lot of the time. And so, they're for that reason alone, a lot of them are just deemed naturally sleazy or naturally kind of like icky or whatever. But that scene also shows that like Sultan, he knows his shit because right when she says it, he's
Yeah.
like he gets it right away. He's not just like these idiots who are going like, yeah, his mother, ha 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 ha, type of shit. He's just like, shut up, because he knows that she's got a fucking good idea because he knows what's gonna sell. You know what I'm saying? And that's also one of the funny and the basic premise of the entire movie is that they need to find a white heavyweight. That's unlocking the key is that it has to be a white heavyweight because the race relations, you also have to remember this is 1996 and you might be just a little bit too young because you're just like a couple years younger than me, but bro, I remember waking up, my mom used to fucking watch the news every morning before we go to school. So she'd have the news on. And I remember waking up one morning and my mom was like sitting there watching the TV when there were fucking riots in LA. And she was just like, holy shit. Cause like there's, bro, like the news fucking stories were like zooming in and these motherfuckers are just fucking like, and like decking some guy and like they were not fucking.
You lived in Cali, didn't you?
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
and the riots also happened in San Diego, just to a much smaller degree. But nonetheless, like, they were not blurring shit out. They were showing everything. And so my point is that in 96, it was probably a lot easier to buy that this was a thing or that this, like the logic of this or whatever, rather than in 2025 where people are trying to fucking like rise above it and shit. Nah,
Mhm.
dude, we're only a couple years removed for some really serious racial shit happening, especially in Southern California. So it was, like I said, the logic of it or whatever is pretty easy to grasp. But they fucking find a white heavyweight. That's exactly, and it's also absurd is is the thing And we talked about this before too, where it's in 1996. There hasn't been a serious white heavy fuck, dude. I hadn't even done the math
I was
before
gonna
we
say
started
that,
doing the
yeah.
show, but now I'm gonna have to think about it. When's the last time in 1996 that there was like a serious like white heavyweight,
Cooney.
but like a champion?
Oh, uh,
Ugh. It had been a while. It had been a fucking while,
if you mean like from the U.S.,
or
because if
not, or
you don't want
not.
to, if you don't want, I mean, if you count Coetzee happened in 83,
Yeah, I mean
and
that's
then before Coetzee, there was because it didn't happen in the 70s. Um,
and that took some maneuvering. So I mean,
yeah, totally. So
it
yeah,
had
that
been a
happened.
little
I mean,
while.
it had been a long while. I mean, up until he might have been the first. I mean, unless I'm missing somebody here. Yeah,
And
I
and
think it was Coetzee and Johansson before that. Like that
and
was really.
Lennox Lewis retired. I think he officially retired in like 2004, like the year after he fought Vili Klitschko, I believe, was when he officially was like, "No, I'm not coming back." So since that time, it's been primarily white. At least if you're looking, especially like the lineal heavyweight title, it's been primarily white champions that have been somewhat dominant. So that's again, excuse me, when we were talking about this earlier, why it might not make sense to revisit this movie now, and people might be like, I'm not getting it. Why is that funny? Why does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah.
Well, in
Now,
1996, it totally did.
because it absolutely because back then, like you said, there wasn't. So Marciano retires, um,
Yeah,
and then from
Johansson.
there, yeah, Johansson. And so after Johansson becomes champion, then it was like up until Johansson and then Coetzee. But then there was a handful of American heavyweight that people got excited
Yeah,
about
there were
that.
some that were really good and top
Yeah, and then
contenders.
yeah, but I mean, like, you had Dwayne Bobbick who just became like comedic foil for everybody, unfortunately. Um, and that, you know, I like Bobbick, you know what I mean? He's not a,
Nothing wrong with the
uh,
guy, but at least on paper, yeah, a lot of people were really disappointed, and it
and
seemed
it's
to
just,
kind of be a
to
kick to
see
the
his
pants.
face, and you would see his face and look like, you're just contorting in this like horror and pain whenever he got hit. Yeah, he just, and you're like, then you
Yeah,
have
he like
Seth.
didn't even get knocked down half the time. He'd get hit and just go.
Yeah. And he wouldn't
He'd
even
like freeze
he
up and
wouldn't
be
go
like,
down. He would
ah,
just freeze up and get knocked around like a
poor
fucking
guy.
pig. Exactly. You had to feel for him.
Great
Um,
amateur though.
Surprisingly. But then you had Jerry Cooney, who was the mainstay of like, everybody was like fell up into that fucking Cooney mania at that point. And understandably so, because of the way he beheaded Ken Norton and, crunched the ribs of Ron Lyle, even though both of those guys were old fossils and had no business being in the ring. I It got everyone really, really excited, and by the time he fought Larry Holmes and like the way they built that fight up, and they even referenced that in the movie as well. Remember, they were like, Sultan goes, "What's the highest grossing fight in boxing history?" And then his lackeys are just like, "Oh, Hagler Leonard and this one," and they're
Yeah,
just throwing
was
little
that
random
even
stuff.
true at that time? Like maybe the
Honestly, I
gate or
don't know. I'd
something,
have to
but
look
like
at it, maybe, but I don't think so.
maybe like the gate or something, but I don't know that that was even true. But it was true enough for the purpose of
But
the
it
movie, I
ties in for
guess.
what they were trying to say exactly. And then
Yeah.
he was like Cooney versus Holmes. And you even see uh Damon Wayans there, fucking Roper going like even like mimicking him because he knew the answer already. Like this wasn't the first time he heard this probably. He was like Cooney versus Holmes. And he was like, why is that? And Roper's like, because Cooney was a white boy, and exactly what it was. And he was like, yeah, and his jab couldn't break win. It's so yeah, right. Like that
Yeah,
was his
not true at
fucking
all,
left
but
hand.
okay. I guess
Sure.
that's a nice drop joke for the movie.
I mean, Cooney always got clowned on television. You remember that one time he made an appearance on The Simpsons, and I think Barney knocked him out. Um. Anyways,
Well,
not to
and
be.
when that again just goes to show you how like stupid and how like lowly the fucking white heavyweights were thought of at this point. They were like white heavyweight, you know. And I actually remember in the trailer of the movie, that was one of the main fucking jokes in the trailer of the movie where Damon Wayne says white heavyweight. That's like saying black unity.
Black Unity.
He
Yeah.
says that in the fucking trailer, and that was one of the fucking big ah ha 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 type moments, you know.
I mean, it is a funny line when he says that because, and again, it's the time period of when he was saying that too, of like what things were going on. It was absolutely insane. But um, they eventually find Conklin. Like, and I want to mention Burt Sugar again before they get run up on, because this is another part of the movie that's like really hokey, but it's still funny in the sense that these guys want their fucking title shot before they get run up by the number one contender because they get pulled up on. You hear you hear Sultan's lawyer, Samuel Jackson's lawyer. He was like, "Oh, I'll call Burt Sugar," like trying to find Conklin. So as they're about to do that, they get a run in from Jamie Foxx and his fighter, demanding a title shot and pulling up guns and all this stuff. And again, nothing like that would really happen. I mean, maybe it's something so, there were definitely standoffs and like arguments and like fights and different like that between like managers and promoters and even their fighters as well when they were trying to get together and haggle over shit and question, especially earlier in the days. Like there was talks about how I remember I was reading about how, like, for instance, not to veer off course too much, but like Terry McGovern and George Dixon would get together to like go over the rules, and McGovern's manager said something to Dixon's manager, and all of a sudden a free for all broke out with almost everybody, and all this shit happened. Like that's what they're almost like similar to happen here, except that fucking Jamie Foxx and his crew pull out guns and like threaten to shoot everybody up unless you give us a title fight. But the best part about it is that Samuel L. Jackson's character again, Sultan, is brilliant in how he like plays their mind. He was like, Marvin, I'm giving you a title shot. Like again, he's doing the Don King theatrics where he's like mind fucking with them. And he was like, I have my guys over here just, putting all the ducks in a row right now. Everything's gonna be good. And he was like, man, fuck this duck talk. What you mean? And he was like, no, no, we got you. And he was like, in fact, he was like, just as a good faith compliment, we're gonna get you a new beautiful broham. And he was like, and if people don't know what a broham is, it's a Cadillac. And that's what's going to tie in the other character who now plays a central part in the movie. It's his Jeff Goldblum.
So this movie was made about a year or so, or released about a year or so, and one of the reasons why it ties up and it makes sense, like for the time, and why like the gun scene or whatever is kind of dumb, but it
Yeah.
makes sense for the time because this shit was about a year after Tim Anderson shot Elvis Parker.
I didn't even think about that. You're right.
So I mean, like I'm not
I don't
saying
think
that.
they were referencing that,
No,
but
no,
like,
no. I'm not saying that they had that in mind, but I'm just saying that in the sense of like, oh, well, that's unrealistic. Like, there's nobody messing with guns. Dude, there's stories about that kind of shit. Dudes going to meetings with Don King and his boys got fucking guns sitting there on his lap and shit like that. And again, I wasn't there. I'm not saying this shit's fucking true. I'm just saying that these aren't exactly outlandish stories and shit that never happened or has never been fucking thought about. It's
thousand stories about Don King always carrying a pistol and always carrying a pistol. And that one time when, excuse me, after Hagler Leonard, him and Bob Arum got into a scuffle
yeah.
because Don was trying to climb into the ring and Bob, he had nothing to do with the fight, so Bob was trying to pull him down. And as he did, he said that he saw a pistol come out of Don's pocket.
I mean, I'm not saying it did happen, but it's believable. It's believable. Let's put it that way. Bro, how many fucking times and in how many countries has Don King been like strong-armed fucking robbery? There's been like he's been on like three different continents and in fucking like five different countries, you know. The guy invites trouble.
And
But
so
it
yeah, exactly. That's something then that's like conceivable about what happened in this movie, what could happen
that's
because yeah,
exactly. That's
literally, that did
exactly
happen to
why.
Don King. You're absolutely right. Like, there's that one time, the most famous one probably, because it made the news and everything else, and it's been written about in books, is when, Don went to the Bahamas trying to not necessarily stop Ali Burbick, but to try to get his piece of the pie of it, if he wasn't going to be able to stop it. And when he went there demanding a certain amount of percentage and all kinds of other stuff, blah, blah, blah. And when the promoters of the event, the guy James Cornelius, a member of the Nation of Islam, and three of his bodyguards caught wind of it, they flew directly to where Don King was staying, went right up to his hotel room and beat the fucking daylights out of him. and sent him packing. And they said, if you step foot back on the country before this fight ends, we'll kill you. He was like, go back home and don't fuck around with us. And what was Don gonna do over there? You know what I mean? Like he was by himself. He didn't have any of his people over there. That was their territory.
And
And he
that's
said it was,
and I've said this shit on other episodes, don't remember which, not important, but I've said that no matter who you are, who you think you are in the US, you go
yeah.
to another country and you don't even understand how quickly the rug gets yanked out from under you, bro. Because like I've said on other shows too, you and I grew up in the 80s during a time where you can conceivably like people on TV and in movies would get into trouble and they'd go, "Motherfucker, I'm American." And people go, "Whoa." Now you say, "Bitch, I'm American." They go, "Oh, that's I'll fucking stab you before I shoot you." Perfect. Great. You're fuck I hate you. So
Yeah.
like fucking people don't get it. How quickly you will have the rug yanked fucking out from under you. And that just goes to show you, yeah, Don King might be running shit. Not over there. Not fucking over there. But
Yeah.
that's also another reason why like this type of like, Trouble finds Don King, and Trouble also because he's the similar kind of character finds the Reverend Sultan here in this movie because he's up to no good and he's obviously up to no good. But the name of the game is outmaneuvering. And that's the entire fucking movie is that like these people are trying to outmaneuver other people. And then you find out, there's only one person who's doing the ultimate fucking maneuvering here.
hmm Yeah, and it's a whole thing. So afterwards, he tells them, "Oh, we're gonna give you a title shot." They eventually back off, and it goes on its way. So they need to go find Conklin. That's the main gig right there because they found their man who's gonna be able to become champion. And they ended up, and this becomes one of my favorite scenes in the film because again, it just makes absolutely no fucking sense in its own way. But like, they find him in Seattle, I think it was, right?
No, it's I
Was
think
it Seattle?
Cleveland.
Cleveland. You're right. It was in Cleveland.
Yeah,
That's right.
which is actually kind of funny because during that time
Cleveland was a big,
there was a
like, yeah,
massive
punk rock.
hardcore scene in Cleveland, which is actually kind of funny.
Yeah, this was during the mid 90s, so like the early 90s was like hip hop, New Jack Swing era, really popular for that. And as people started unfortunately rebelling, because I still love the New Jack Swing era, started rebelling against it and then started getting really into like Nirvana and other things like that. Which I mean that always had an audience, but it really started going mainstream like by the 93, 94-ish, right?
Yeah.
And so by the time, again, everything just kind of aligns with the time period of what this movie was. 1996, that was still a very popular time of like punk music and just rock. I don't know, a lot of shit like that. The character he was portraying. So they go and they find him as a fucking singer at one of those like dumpster fire like fucking basement clubs. And Bambi says that she loves him. She can see the charisma in him. Everyone kind of like you can see that he has charisma on stage, even though he's dopey and goofy. Like they all just see the potential of the money that they're gonna make with this just by his presence and all that. And the scene that the women swooning on him too. And so they bring him backstage, and during the scene too, like it's just well, it perfectly emits what you would probably see backstage during a time period like that. A guy, one of the bandmates bringing over random girls who just want to hook up with him and be like, "Yo, you like this one? No, okay, drag her away. How about this one?" Because that's what they were doing. Terry, how about her? No, man. Okay. And then he finds the one that he likes. But go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say too, and it's also I think it's like without even going any farther for the character, you already know that this guy's totally full of shit because he's sitting here talking about like, oh no, man, like I'm above all this shit, but he's like, bring me the groupies. What? You're gonna pay me? Oh yeah, like that type of shit. Like they're within like fucking 2 minutes, you're like, oh god, he's a
Yeah, you
likable
can totally see
character, but
he's a
also
completely like
sleazy.
brain dead idiot. Like he has
Yeah,
no
just
idea
a
what's going
total
on. Yeah.
fucking moron.
Yes, he's a moron. But I think that's what they realized they could like he means well. He has good intentions. That's the part of it that you feel for him a little bit. Because like you realize quickly that he means well and he has really good intentions, but he's a fucking idiot in every sense of the word. And you don't know where he went wrong, whether it was the boxing career or if he took a bunch of shit after he stopped boxing or where, but like he's brain dead. Like he's just very clueless and he doesn't like things don't click with him. And like in his own mind it does. Like those are the most fascinating people that in their mind everything that they
And
say works for them.
and
It's
and
like
he's this big rock star in some
yeah,
tiny fucking hardcore club in Cleveland too. So that's
exactly.
that's what's fucking that's what's great about it.
And I forgot what the name of the because Bambi is the one who initially finds him. She was like, Sultan, I got him. He was like, he's in Cleveland in a band called, I forgot the name of it. And he was like,
Massive head wound.
yeah, massive head wound. And she said, for the
And
kid.
he sings with a fucking bloody bandage on his head.
And remember, she says it's for the kids, apparently. I don't need my eagle fay. I don't. And so he starts going through that. And so they meet him, and when he finds his groupie and she's trying to hook up with him. But then one of my all-time favorite lines, I don't know why I love this line so much, but it's just so ridiculous and stupid and it just makes me laugh every time I hear it, is that it shows his cluelessness, is when they go, he was like, Terry, Sultan Samuel L. Jackson goes, Terry, I like to think of you as my brother. And then Terry looks at him and goes, I'm your anti-brother. And then takes a swing of it, and not realizing what he's saying either. He thinks he's like,
Yeah, he's saying some like transcendental fucking philosophical shit, and people, it's like, what?
I'm sorry, like he just, even as a kid, I found that fucking hysterical because I realized like he's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's saying when he thinks he does.
Yeah, and he
And
keeps
he says it so
repeating
earnestly too. Like he doesn't mean anything
the
bad by it.
homelessness situation, the
Yeah.
homelessness situation. He keeps repeating that fucking line, and it's great. Yeah,
He just, I'm your anti-brother.
yeah, just a total fucking idiot. But Peter
He means
Berg plays
well.
that fucking part great.
Mhm.
And Peter Berg went on to direct a bunch of fucking produce and direct a bunch of boxing related shit too. So I know that he is one of the fucking boxing fans on board here.
Yeah. Yeah, he was great. I'm your anti-brother. And he was like, my anti-brother. He's like, I like that. And he looks at his lawyer, and the lawyer was like, yeah.
And I will say too, there's not a lot of actual boxing in the movie. Not that there needs to be, but the boxing that there is just convincing enough that you're like, it's not distracting. You're not like, ugh. Because like in some of the fucking movies, like even like Creed and shit, not Michael B. Jordan, he does a great job, but like some of like the peripheral characters and shit, like in a lot of other boxing movies, is like it's like embarrassing. You're like, dude, this is not believable at all. I mean, but Damon Wayans does a good enough job. Peter Berg does a good enough job that it's like, all right, we're cool.
They convinced him, through some good faith that they were like, yo, you'll wipe out homelessness and all this other stuff that he wants to do while he's getting a blowjob. As a kid, I didn't know what was happening. I just saw him smiling. I thought he was smiling because he was happy with getting that money. I didn't realize as a kid that she went down on him to like, you know, the blow him off. But it's again, like as an adult, you see things and start laughing more and all that, and then it makes me realize my parents let me watch this as a kid. But then so that happens, and they bring him in for the press conference, and then again, this is another fucking hysterical part because apparently Burt Sugar and the rest of the writers have no idea who's being announced as the next opponent. And when they pull off the banner, you see you see everybody in stunned silence, which would actually happen. You could see this happen again in like boxing back in the day. Our new contender, and there's like, who? And they all just stare at the same thing, like, what the fuck was this? And they're like, Terry Conklin. And you see Bambi and Bart, Tim Kawakami, and the rest of them are just, what? And you got to think, this is again like one of those things that how they would try to back in the day with the sanctioning bodies. And let's use a Ray Mancini fight for an example, right? Dave Wolf or that was his manager. Dave Wolf would like hold a press conference somewhere. Ray Mancini, his next opponent is going to be, I don't want to use Ducko Kim, Orlando Romero. Who? Yeah, yeah, from Peru. Everyone kind of looks at, okay, no, Howard Davis wasn't available, or something like
And well, and that
that.
type of shit did actually. I mean, it still does happen, but now it happens on social media, where there will be some headline, the next blah blah blah, and there's gonna be a bunch of people going, "The fuck? Why?"
Yeah.
And that does happen now. So it's like, again, this
Oh,
is
I
just
think
another
especially for
small.
those Don King undercards back in the day when they would be like Chavez is going to fight this guy or Terry Norris is going to fight this
Yeah,
guy.
he fought
Ian
a
Jackson is
couple of the
gonna
dudes
fight
he
this
fought
guy.
were like, "What?
Yeah.
Who?
And
Where?
everyone, yeah,
What?"
yeah, when they announce the undercards, and they'd be like, Awesome.
Yeah, and just another scene where it's like you're like, all right, this is fairly legit, like this totally could fucking happen and could happen this way. And so like when they're going through the little explainer as to how exactly Terry Kong, and they don't even actually explain anything. You know what I'm saying? Like they're just he doesn't give an actual reason. He isn't like, oh, Terry Conklin beat so and so, he beat so and so, nothing like that. He just says like, well, the esteemed and honorable Julio Escobar from the, I think they make up like the IBO or IBA or
Something, yeah, something W.
WBI
Yeah,
or something
something,
like
yeah.
that. And he's sitting there just like fucking smoking a cigarette and like sweating his ass off, like, yeah,
Again, he plays that part perfectly. He knows he's a scumbag.
yeah.
He's just
He knows everybody's looking at him and just going like, oh, this fucking guy, god damn it. And he's just like, oh, yeah, we're good. It's great.
oh my God, I love that part.
Yeah, dude. And fucking when he's sitting
The
there
way he
trying
pulls his
to
hands up like to acknowledge it, he's like,
And when he is getting bribed too, because they show the outright bribing
yeah,
scene between Sultan and Julio Escobar, he's going like, "Well, what do you want? Money, women, drugs?" And he's like, "Well, how about power?" And Julio Escobar goes, "Yeah, I want power." And he goes like, "No, you're just getting money, money, women, and drugs." He's like, "All right, fine, fine, I'll take that." But it's also the funny thing is that that's almost kind of like foreshadowing and almost kind of like a central part of the plot where everybody who's actually looking for power and trying to get up the rung in the fucking thing winds up getting burned. And that kind of circles around to that dude Mitchell Kane, Jeff Goldblum's character.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because in
yeah.
the very opening scene of the movie, it's funny because it's almost like they're unintentionally foreshadowing what happens now in 2020s in boxing, where people are going to fights and there's motherfuckers who are like, yeah, here's
Yeah,
my
yeah,
fucking
yeah.
thing
Watch
for
and
YouTube and my fucking guy. And you're like, get the fuck out of the way, dude. I fucking bought tickets to watch this shit. And they got the fucking like camera rig. They're doing some fucking interview with some guy who's ranked number 12 at fucking super flyweight. For my fucking, it's my boxing and fucking barbecue dinner fucking podcast. And that's exactly, those motherfuckers are shouting at fucking Jeff Goldblum, get the fuck out of the way, hard copy and all shit. And so, but
Yo,
that's also
do you remember that guy in the beginning? I don't mean to stop you
no,
really quick.
no.
That first guy, he doesn't play a main character. I don't think he has a name, but he's clearly like, he's clearly a guy, a high roller, like in the front row, and he's the first one that starts making a noise. He was like, yo, man. He's like, what the fuck? You call him hard copy? He's like, what
Yeah.
stupid ass down? He's like, I didn't pay $1,200 and fly y'all whatchamajigga out here. He was like to do some shit. And then Goldblum turns around and he was like, my brother, I come in peace. He was like, and the guy goes, my
My
brother,
brother.
my brother. Oh, hell. He starts taking off my jacket. I gotta let no white man call me my brother. And I never heard this until the other day when I rewatched it. He was like, my brother is dead. I ain't gotta let that motherfucker call me no goddamn my brother.
Yeah, dude, he starts talking about yeah, dude, that shit is fucking
And Global starts running away with his crew, and he was like, "There's three of you and one of me, and you're running away like roaches when the lights come on." He starts storming after them.
and
That's
fucking
right away. That's such a good part. Like it was so funny when that happened.
and
Sorry, I
it's
just had to
and
mention.
the funny thing about Goldblum's character too is that it actually, and I can tell you, I can tell you, confirm, as somebody who has worked in the press and stuff like
Mhm.
that, that what winds up happening with a lot of people who are writers and who get into boxing, and they're like, oh, they want to expose this and they want to shine a light on this and feature these kinds of fighters because they love these really downtrodden stories, and this person's fucking it up because they're taking all the money, and this fucking promoter is a piece of shit. And then they wind up going and working in the PR department because there's no money in fucking exposing. There's no money in being a righteous fucking dick. Like, if you got the money to do it, great. And if you're like independently wealthy, cool. But otherwise, that's what's going to happen is you fucking uncover some shit and they go, actually, just come work for me. That's exactly what happens in the real world. So that's the funny thing is Jeff Goldblum's character, trying to angle in this little side story to get a fucking expose on Sultan because he's got dirt on him and all this shit. And so during this entire time when they're figuring out the Terry Conklin shit, that's when Jeff Goldblum's character swoops in right when they've kind of gotten this entire thing figured out and tries to ruin it basically. Instead of ruining it and allowing him to do anything, they just say, come work for us.
And he goes with it.
Yeah, even though he's the fucking like he's the crusading fucking
Yeah.
guy. Yeah.
In the initial scenes, he's really like putting in his work. He somehow gets credentialed, which that's the only one part of the movie that I find like a little funny is that like, he's the guy that's like,
Yeah, they would have he wouldn't have gotten past the fucking
no, no,
the
he's in the
vetting.
very beginning of it. Like, yeah, he's clearly there videotaping all that. He's and he's all he's making expose consulting clearly. But then again, this is boxing media today, and almost everybody gets credentialed. So who the fuck knows? You know what I mean? It's almost like you know how like he's almost like Jack Newfield trying to expose Don King, except he goes to work for the dark side. And if you think about it, Jack Newfield's Don King book didn't come out. Well, he came out a few years before that.
Well, and this actually happened several years after this movie, but Thomas
Yeah,
Hauser doing the massive expose on HBO and then going to work for HBO.
that's right. That totally. Yeah. Holy fuck! I didn't even think about that. Um,
Like I said, dude, the parallels in this shit are like if you look at it for what it is and you're just like that's just some silly boxing comedy, then
mhm,
fine, that's cool. Then you're probably going to rate it 2.5 out of 5. If you look at it and you're like, wow, this shit is actually really mimicking the sport like perfectly, it's a fucking 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5.
totally. So yeah, Jeff Goldblum's character Mitchell is his name.
Hmm.
Uh, he ends up getting hired because the initial publicist for Sultan Samuel Jackson was John Lovitz, and John Lovitz's name in it was it Saul or something like
Yeah,
that?
Saul
Yeah.
something. But yeah, Saul. Oh, they
His
just
name,
say Saul.
yeah, they say Saul, and he has some memorable parts in it too. Like, I have always loved John Lovitz and everything he's been in. He's funny as shit. And he plays the perfect part too as like Sult. He's the fall guy for Sultan. I mean, a lot of PR people usually are matchmakers of stuff like that in boxing. The promoter is the one that always has to put the blame on his, understudies usually. And Lovitz is the one that takes the fall in everything in this movie. He's the guy that like Fred Sultan just absolutely berates and beats down for everything that goes down. And initially, the publicity for this fight is horrible because of everybody sees it for what it is. It's a fucking fraud, and they're reporting it as such. And Lovitz and his job is not doing a good enough job trying to spin it to the like people could actually
Yeah,
like
he straight
believe
up
it.
says I can't do this because it's too
Yeah,
bad.
he said that. He said I can't. He said I can't make caviar out of
Yeah, I
salt.
can't make caviar out of fish eggs. He
Yeah, yeah.
says, "Fuck."
Yeah, he was like, bro, I can't do anything with this. He's like, it's fucking horrible. But he also has one of a memorable line in it too. And one of my favorites is that after the initial press conference when they're messaging the fight, um, this writer comes out and approaches Sultan and goes, Julio Escobar is a whore on your payroll, which essentially he is. And so Sultan Samuel Jackson turns around and he was like, man, yeah, that's a liable thing because Julio Escobar, he was like, is a Spanish and you're being racist and da 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 da. And he starts, going on a tirade like Don King would usually do. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And like,
and instead of when somebody shouts the truth at you, just say something outlandish and go on a rant instead of
yeah,
addressing what they say, you know?
exactly. And that's what he started going on. And so he was like, so you're a racist and you're this and that. And the guy was like, I'm not racist. And he was like, do you hate Jews and black people as well? And the guy was like, I am Jewish. And he goes, well, then you're an Uncle Tom. And the guy goes, Jews can't be Uncle Tom. And so and that's when,
Sure we can.
yeah, he looks at John, he stares at him incredulously to John Lovitz. He goes, as if like, like Don King
Yeah,
or anyone
I
else.
need you to
Yeah.
validate this.
Exactly. He stares at him, and I love that John Lovitz, like initially just kind of like he realizes he's being looked at. He goes, "No, we can." Another thing, just like the just over the top stupid shit, but it's hilarious. And so, um, he gets rid of the job, and then like Jeff Goldblum takes the gig. And he actually does a good job because he knows how to spin something. He's just, this is perfect for what he does. But the best part too is that when he has to confront his news crew, who like so like believed in him and his purpose for the truth, and were there for every step of the way, he has to tell them now that he's joined the dark side. And the best part is that like he doesn't even do it, right? Like he doesn't actually say like, "Hey, I'm just gonna
Yeah,
take
he
this
just goes straight into promoting the motherfucker.
PR mode." He was like, "Turn the camera on," and then out of nowhere. Is this racism? Or is this boxing? Or is this blah blah blah? Like he just goes into this full fucking spiel.
Or is this righteous support of one's tribe?
And his his assistant there, the lady, immediately picks up on the bullshit and just smells it immediately. He's just like, Mitchell, are you selling out? And he was like, well, and that's when she was like, fuck you, I quit. And the rest of them start storming off. He was like, Vivian, we can win a Pulitzer.
Well, and yeah, and that's the funny thing is he's trying to veil what he's doing with this fucking
Yeah.
it, but again,
But
like
it
back
just shows that, like, yo, just give me like fucking a handful of
that
money. I
it's
don't
going to corrupt you, that
know.
it's going to fucking eat you from the inside out one way or another. That's the whole fucking thing.
The
But
way
that's
Samuel Jackson was smooth with how he did it too. He was like, because initially he was like, I got these things, I want to bust you up, blah 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 blah. And he was like, man, I like you. I like the way you have a goal. I like the way you want to reach a goal, and yada yada yada. And the guy was like, so, you're not going to be able to do this and that. He's like, no, 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 no. I want to offer you a job. He's like, really?
whoa, shit, I can afford health insurance. What do you mean?
Yeah. You gotta pay me for that? Okay. And yeah, bro, like not everybody and in boxing, like you said, many people end up doing that. There's only I can think of the only two off the top of my head, like maybe beside well, not Hauser, because he said he did go to HBO. Were back in the 70s, the ones who the Don King tournament there, which was Flash Gordon and Alex Walu, you know. And Flash Gordon, who exposed that and got blackballed basically from everyone from the industry because no one could actually trust, no one wanted to trust him
Yep.
because he was about the truth in the sport and about exposing the badness and whatever. And wasn't worried about who he pissed off or anything like that and had a really popular newsletter. He was that type of dude. And he never sold out. So,
Yeah, and I mean it's not like it's anything new too. It's not like it only started happening in the 80s or 90s. Going back into the 20s, there were rumors of some of the most famous sports writers and boxing writers. There were rumors that they were paid off by promoters, that Tex Rickard had so and so and so and so and so in his pocket. Some of them were probably true, with especially with the coverage that they were being given. Some of it was
no.
probably true, and if it wasn't true explicitly, it was true in the sense that these writers got favorable access and shit like
Mhm.
that to fighters, or that they would get called first by the promoter or get contact, etc. So it's really again like this is a thing that's like not even remotely outlandish whatsoever, even though some of it's played up for comedy. But it another part of the story too when they kind of move forward with Terry Conklin and trying to kind of like rehab his image and promote him and shit like that is putting him in with fucking with Jonathan Rice Davies, who of course people in like the 2000s would know him as the guy who played Gimli in Lord of the Rings, but people from our fucking generation know him as Sala from Indiana Jones 100%.
Yeah.
But that's the dude who they bring in to train Terry Conklin. And John Rice Davies is a dude who's like a traditional British actor. He was like doing theater and shit like that in like the 70s and 80s and shit. But nonetheless, he's brought in as obvious comedic comic fucking relief here is the stereotypical old white racist trainer who's basically
He's just
just
not racist.
yeah, everything is about race, and every sentence that comes out of his mouth has got some thinly veiled or explicitly fucking racist shit that he fucking says. And Conklin is just like, hold on there, buddy. This isn't about race at every fucking, turn.
And that, you know how racist you have to be from an idiot like Conklin to kick onto it and be like, bro, you are racist? Because Conklin didn't even realize the dumb shit he was saying half the time and contradicted himself. So for him to be able to be like, no, Johnny, you're a racist asshole. And you see that dude, Johnny, being like, me a racist? He was like, yeah, you're a racist as there any
I'm a
was.
bloody Englishman. Like,
Yeah. Well, the fairest people of them all.
yeah, dude.
But he is loyal to his fighter too because he was the first person to jump up when during the next press conference or whatever it was Shabazz, the number one contender who was still pissed off about not getting his shot and realized he's been fucked over because he was promised a title fight, as a lot of contenders would be. Oh no, 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 don't worry, you're gonna get your title fight next. You got it. You're the mandatory challenger. You've been mandatory challenger for like 2 years. You know what I mean? We're gonna get you that shot. Okay, okay, cool. And then and then and then you realize, wait a minute, what? Who? He's getting a shot before me? What happened to my shot? No, these something happened, man. We just had to go to a different direction this time, but don't worry, you're still gonna get your shot. Blah, blah, like that. And so obviously he goes to go and they'll instigate that, but as he goes down there, that's when another like brilliant scene comes up because again, it's a little bit dated that you have to be like of our age, and obviously people that listen to the show are, if not older, but like they have like the way they talk in it. There was at one point in that scene where Jamie Foxx and his fighter go on bum rush the press conference, and another brilliant part, I love this, is where his like you said, the trainer for Conklin initially goes down there and goes confronts them, and he's being held back trying to scream at them, and he's yelling racial shit at them and all that. And they go and Jamie Foxx's fighter goes, "Sit your fat Pavarotti ass down." As a kid, I knew what they were talking about too, because the average person today, like younger person, wouldn't know who Luciano Pavarotti is. I mean, why would you? Like, opera is not that really popular unless you're like really into that niche subject. And then, um, also him, he's been dead for a very long time. Like, thing is, Pavarotti though, back in the '80s and the '90s, stuff like that. Even if you weren't in opera, which none of us really were,
Yeah.
but like you just saw him on TV, like he acted.
He was like the quintessential fucking male opera singer.
Yeah, and he was always around everywhere. You just kind of saw him. He was, around. Another like pop culture person, maybe to a lesser degree than others, but you would just know of him.
Yeah, the reference makes sense in 96 for sure.
Oh,
Now
and then
people
you
be
see
like,
that.
"Who?"
What was the actor's name again?
John Rice Davies.
Yeah, if you've seen John Rhys Davies and then you get that reference, I mean, it even made me laugh back then because they looked exactly the
Yeah,
fucking
well, and it's Shabazz, I think, who says, "Sit your Pavarotti ass
yes,
down,"
yeah.
and then Jamie Foxx is behind him and starts going, "Fuck
Fuck
you,
yeah.
fuck you."
Yeah, fuck you. And I started dying.
Like just a small little
Yeah.
throwaway line that I'm just like, "Fuck yeah, dude."
It's so good. And then you say, get the bloody away from me. Get no, 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 no. But, and that's another plot turn in this movie is that finally everyone's looking at this fight as like a fraud and a fake and da 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 da. But Terry Conklin goes down, confronts, Shavaz, hits him with a sucker punch, but it's still enough of a shot that knocks him unconscious. And apparently it's the same punch that he knocked out Roper with, 15 or 20 years
Devastating
ago.
overhand right.
Exactly. And so they couldn't have helped that even better. Like you see the MGM owner and Sultan going over there.
Oh,
Woo! And they're just like, yeah, because they're like, oh shit, man. First off, we got rid of our problem, and second, like now we have something legit because we just saw our white boy knock out the number one contender.
and the funny thing too is that also sets up another yet another kind of like boxing trope that
Yeah.
we are very familiar with that like gets kind of fulfilled later on in the end of the movie, but that the whole scene where you're like there's the three fighters and like the one guy beats the other guy and then this guy beats this guy, so therefore and that never works in boxing, and similarly here we find out later on, but that sets up Terry Conklin knocking out Shabazz.
Mhm.
That sets up like the oh well, okay, well maybe he really is in this fight. That's the whole point, is that like they go, okay, well we could sell more tickets now. Now this is a more convincing fight because sure he hasn't fought anybody or whatever, but he at least knocked out on TV right in front of everybody or during the press conference or whatever. He knocked out the number one contender, so we could sell this shit now. And that's exactly what they do. And then you start seeing they kind of do the quick cuts to the people walking up to the sports book. Give me $2 on the clean cut white boy, type of shit. And it's a whole bunch of white people betting on Terry Conklin, which was the exact point of what Sultan was trying to do.
Totally. And keep in mind also another plot that was going on the sidelines was that Roper, Damon Wayne's character, didn't give a fuck at this point. He realized that this was going to be easy work. He had no inclination to train or anything, which is something that happens in boxing as well. Not to the extent that they made it to the movie. Obviously, they exaggerated the hell out of it. But there's been many times over the years in boxing history where the champion or a certain fighter has no fucking respect for their opponent, didn't give a shit about what's going to the
Yeah.
consequence or whatever, was so like in their head that they're going to blast this guy out on the next Tuesday that they didn't train. They didn't give a fuck. They didn't do anything about it. Just blew it off. Come in woefully out of shape and think they were just going to, have a cakewalk. And that's what the premise, Ali was notorious for kind of doing that later on in his career. And that's what ended up getting him fucked up against Leon Spinks, for instance,
Yep.
in there, you know. Um,
A number of heavyweight champions too, like right before this time, Bo
totally.
had a big entourage and got out of shape between a number of fights. Fucking joined the Marines to demonstrate he lasted 2 days. Come on, you know the only one I can really think about during this time that was like a big heavyweight or heavyweight champ coming into this was like Evander Holyfield. He never really skimped and he never really came into fights like out of shape or anything. Not like that. Pretty much everybody else did to some degree. Buster Douglas, obviously, Mike Tyson also, a handful of times right before losing to Buster Douglas. Maybe didn't come in out of shape, but clearly didn't train as much, et cetera, et cetera. So it like made sense to kind of parody this again. And then, one of the great scenes during Roper's training is they show him and finally he's fucking like running his ass off down the street and it's like, oh shit, he's running. And then they pan out and he's running after a fucking ice cream truck that's fucking
Yeah.
driving away from him. You know, it's
Or
fucking great.
if you see him, he's doing sit-ups and he has a cigarette in his mouth and he's exhaling as he goes back down and he puts it back in and goes back up. And yeah, and that during those scenes, his trainer,
Or the promo video when they're doing the promo video and he's like, hey, Terry Conklin,
whoop,
woohoo.
there it is. Yeah,
Whoop, there it
there
is.
it is. And yeah, his trainer is just like, "Oh yeah, man, you should have seen him yesterday. Great workout. He's doing good." Blah blah blah, and trying to like build it up. And they're like, "Well, what about all these reports that we're hearing? The pork skins in Vegas, gallons of gummy bears, the pounds of ice cream, da da da." He was like, "Champ has an entourage. He feeds him." And then he even admits he was like, "Look, even if the champ wasn't in like tip top shape, he's savvy." I mean, I'll give the guy. I know that actor. I forgot his name from that film.
Oh
But
God, he's been in a bunch of shit.
I mean, it's not really he doesn't really have to be a trainer like in terms of like showing him train somebody. But like he sounded like a boxing guy, like his voice and like the way he talked about as a trainer. Like he sounded like somebody like that, you know what I mean? And it's funny too because he actually referenced the Tyson Douglas fight when he was talking about Roper not being in shape. He was like, "Well, Mike Tyson wasn't in shape. Remember when he fought Buster Douglas?" And Dustin, he's like, "Buster KO'd him." And he was like, "Man, my blackness will beat this kid. Don't worry about it." Like that was so those were like the thing, those were the subplots over is that Conklin was starting to gain confidence and thinking he can actually win. People were obviously trying to build him up and thinking that shit. Um,
And then Mitchell Kane
exactly.
also.
Mitchell Kane was like built. That's why I was trying to think. Like Mitchell Kane was like building it well himself too. Like he had a brilliant part. Like he was a good PR guy where he brought in all of this fan mail that was supposedly to Conklin. He was like, let's open up one of these right here. And it was completely a blank piece of paper. And he was like, there's a little kid named whoever and he was in a wheelchair. He was like, if you can win, you'll give me hope that I can even maybe walk again. He was like, wow, wow. So, yes, this touches down on everything that could like actually happen in the sport, in terms of like how a promotion goes and the manipulation and a guy not taking like they kind of like took everything and put it into a melting pot, like a bunch of different things that kind of happen in the sport and like
Yeah.
blended it together. But it works. Like you can't just, you have to condense everything in 90 minutes, and they did the best they could with what they were doing here. And it's funny. Like, they're not making it serious. So they like the fact that they're spoofing it makes it funny because you're not taking it too serious either. You can just understand the references to it and then makes you laugh. You know what I mean? Because it's almost like they're spoofing the sport in general at this point with all the shit.
And Sultan's fucking, his game is so good and it's
Yeah,
so convincing that they've even managed to convince the dude who's in on it. The guy
exactly.
who's fucking Mitchell Kane, who's doing this big expose and he knows everything about the Sultan and all this type of shit. And then he gets hired, and they've done such a good job of convincing people that Terry Conklin can win that this guy now is convinced too, and he's like rubbing his chin like, huh, wow. And so fucking Saul's character, John Lovett's character, comes out of the woodwork. This is another fucking little tiny scene that had me fucking dying, bro. He's like fucking like, psst, hey, psst, and fucking gets Jeff Goldblum's character, and he's like, hey, like Sultan's ripe for a fucking fall. This guy is gonna fall and he's gonna lose it all. And then when he loses it all, you fucking take his place. We'll follow you. And Jeff Goldblum's like, yeah, yeah, fucking like
Yeah, he starts
fucking
believing
totally
this shit.
convinced.
Yeah.
And so then when Saul goes back, because Saul has had his apartment taken from him that was paid for by Sultan, he's now living in the hotel. And he goes into the bathroom to get a fucking rub down. And right when he goes in, he goes, hey, Siegfried, who's that behind you? And then he fucking, if you turn up the volume, because like I was listening to it with my fucking earbuds in and shit, so I could hear like fucking everything. And then also I was watching with like the captions because I'm fucking crazy.
It's like
And
very funny fellas or something, right?
yeah, he goes like, "Hey, come on, get out of the way. I gotta fucking get a shower or something like that." Like, dude, what the fuck? It's such, and again, it lasted like 4 seconds. It's such like a little throwaway, stupid piece of the movie, but it had me fucking dying, bro. Just there were these a bunch of these little tiny scenes that had me fucking dying. So that's another kind of little side plot here is that now Mitchell Kane is starting to go behind Sultan's back, and he goes to Terry Conklin and goes like, hey, I'll help you eradicate homelessness. I'll help you do all this type of shit, but you got to sign with me. So when you defeat Roper and you become the heavyweight champion, you'll be signed with me, which is again 1000% realistic because we've seen this it happened a few years after this with Rockman and said, dude. So the exact same type of thing where like, people are making backroom deals behind so and so's back and all this type of shit. Totally convincing, totally realistic.
And that scene happens when he goes to visit Conklin at his gym. And it's funny too because Conklin's sparring a guy beating him up and he's looking sharp enough, right? But as he goes and
And he's wearing a fucking
that's what I'm
rebel.
saying. He's wearing
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
yeah, he's
sorry. I
wearing
didn't mean to take it from you, but I'm
oh
like,
no 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 no. It's the funniest thing. He's wearing like he
I
goes
never, maybe I just never noticed that, but now I saw it and was
yeah, in
like,
my mind, exactly. It just hit me recently when I rewatched it too, because again, in the mid 90s, even though the Confederate flag was bad,
yeah, and that
it
was
was
on
still
everything. So it was
it
like,
was still being on everything back then. It was like I remember specifically taking a trip to DC as a kid and on a school trip or some shit, and one of my fucking classmates buying Confederate flag something. So yes, they were being sold everywhere. But anyways,
it's
in the
just the
film,
culture.
yeah, they have the part where like, Goldblum goes to visit him and uh they he sits down with Conklin and his manager there and they're talking for a minute and Conklin was like, I got one question. He was like, he's like, do you condone racism?
Do you covet racism?
Yeah, do you covet racism?
Like, what does that even fucking mean?
He's like, you covet racism? And while he's wearing the Confederate flag shirt, mind you, while he's wearing it, right? That's the funniest part about it. He's like, you covet racism? He's like, go home. He's like, do I covet race? No, no. And he's like, are you a racist? No, no. Am I a racist? No. He was like, because there is too much racism in this sport. And he was like, he looks at Johnny, the most
Yeah, and
racist
he
person
starts
on the
going off
planet.
about Vegas. Yeah.
And no, he was like, Johnny. He was like, Johnny, am I right? You see, Johnny, there's just too much of it. Too much of it. Bro, you racist sack of shit. You're more racist than anybody. And he was like, yeah, there's just too much of it. And then he was like, because I don't cover racism and I don't cover this. And da, 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 da.
Yeah, he starts going off about Vegas and how it's a city of
Yeah.
sin and, but yet he's there and he fucking went there to train and is
And so
buying into
yeah,
all of it.
he mentions that he doesn't cover racism, and they all decide to make a deal together. They all put their hands together and be like, all right, we'll work together, and I'm gonna promote you. But he also, like you said, he has like interviews and with other people and stuff like that. And he was like, where they both do, for instance, actually him and Roper, and they're both funny too because Roper is leaning back in his chair, looks like he's drinking coffee or some shit, but like he's just kind of being a dickhead. And they're like, Terry says he's gonna do homelessness and all his stuff, and Roper's like, well, that's his thing. He was like, you're not known for he was like, well, I hear you're known for like doing your little deeds charities. He was like, I want to talk about that. He was like, well, I heard you've donated to children's hospitals. And you've heard that you've donated to this and you've done that. I told you I want to talk about that. Get shut my face. Just get mad because almost like, it's going to mess up his bad guy image, right? By being known as a nice guy. And so, but then they were interviewing Conklin and he's there strumming his guitar and stuff like that. And he was like, "So, what do you think about Vegas?" "Oh man, I hate Vegas. All fake. Da, da, da. What about Cleveland? Cleveland's real people, a real town, and I love it. And I hate Vegas and yabba yabba yabba." And and he was like talking about how much he hates the exploitation of things. And they're like, "Well, you went on Playboy recently." And then
But
they
I
showed,
hated it.
yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't like it.
all of it. And I forgot too. We almost jumped over that part because they were showing the scene of it where the Lou Rawls song, "I Got You Under My Skin." That's a real the Lou Rawls version. "I Got You Under My Skin" was playing, and they were showing both guys, and they showed Terry Conklin posing with the Playboy models because that was another thing. The women loved him. That was the same scene where all the white people were betting on
Yeah.
him, giving money on that one. But his trader too in the background is fucking hysterical. He's over there because the guy followed him everywhere, and Terry's getting like accosted by the women, and they're putting on the hat, and you hear his trainer, "You're a fucking stallion. You're a fucking." Oh
You're a
my,
white stud.
yeah. "You're a stallion, Mick. You're a stallion." And clearly he was enjoying it. And then he says, "Oh, you're on Playboy." "Yeah, I hated every second of it." Uh-huh. But they go through both things and they're just like showing like the up and up until the fight. But then it gets to that point, it comes to the head where it becomes fight night. And I don't unless I'm missing something over there up until then.
No, I don't think so. I mean, like they do the weigh-in and shit like
Oh
that, and
yeah, the
that's
weigh-in was
obviously
hysterical. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was the
which
funny.
was that yeah, because Wayne Damon Wayne's character fucking, Roper comes to the weigh-in and he's got like a massive, obviously fake belly on and shit like that. But that's the point is like he's like I think they tab him in as like 6'3", and then he weighs in at 238, which is way heavier than he's ever weighed in or whatever. And funnily enough, like they're not like fudging Terry Conklin. Like, they're like he says he's like 6 foot and that he's fucking like 200 pounds or something. So he's like obviously not a very big heavyweight. But point is that yeah, there's that Terry Conklin has been in shape. He's been training. He's at least in theory had his head in the game and all this type of shit. And Roper looks like shit. But then he has an outburst at the weigh-in, which is very fucking similar to Larry Holmes and like Larry Holmes fucking going off at the press after what was the second Spinks fight, right?
Yes.
Pretty sure it was the second Spinks fight, where many people thought that he won that fight, and he thought he won that fight, and he starts basically just sticking it to the press, his
He
famous
did
fucking
after
speech.
both fights, but yeah, the second fight I think was um
Well, the
you
first
know
fight was the to Marciano's brother,
yeah,
and then the second one was when he went off at the press, I think.
exactly. Yeah, and he was on the air with HBO and he was like, "Y'all can kiss me where the sun don't shine, and since I'm on HBO, that's my big black behind."
Yeah, and everyone was like, "Oh,
He
yeah."
said, "Bruh."
Whoa, he referenced his derriere, John. Yeah,
Yeah, all right, just go back to a Ring magazine in 1981 and see the language he was using in those fucking interviews, all
yeah,
right?
he kept it light. Are you
Yeah.
serious?
And if he,
Fuck.
the fact that he said behind and not started using like 18 different derogatory terms
Yeah,
on
like
everybody
homophobic
around him.
slurs left
Yeah,
and right.
exactly.
That's what
Please.
was going on. So
Because
but yeah, he kept it light. But then Roper, he goes on like a little rant too, where he's basically kind of just feels disrespected. Where he's like, I'm 38-0 with 34 knockouts, or whatever he says, and this, I've given you guys all this, and this is what you show me. Like, you don't respect me. And all the press is just like, but you look like shit. What the fuck? Like they pan over to Burt Sugar,
he
and he's
drops
got
his,
like, yeah, he's got
remember
fucking
his cigar drops? Yeah, he's like,
everyone's just fucking like, what the fuck? Because he does look like shit. But that's the whole point is that even looking like shit and not training and being a total fucking washed idiot, they're bringing in Conklin and hyping him up so much. That's the whole point of the movie. And so then that's convinces
someone
extra
said he was
people.
eating chitlins. Remember at one point you hear one of the
Yeah.
guys in the back there, he said, Roper looks at least 250. He must be eating chitlins or something.
Yeah. Like, what the fuck does that have to do with anything? But
It's just another fucking random
yeah,
comment.
just some another fucking racial fucking comment that they're gonna throw in
It's
there.
just stupid that they said that. And then like Sugar drops his cigar, and I mean I don't think they were referencing this, but like the closest you could see to a belly like that, and this is actually true, is if you go back to Ali when he said he was making a comeback around 1979 and 1980, and Ring Magazine and every other publication was making all kinds of fucking cartoons and jokes
Yep.
about because he legitimately had a belly like that. There are photos of him that he had that roper belly
And
with
I
like
was
the
gonna
fucking
say he
with the
notoriously
fold.
loved
Yeah,
junk food too.
yeah.
Like when he would, but like between fights, he loved ice cream and he loved junk food. And he usually was in very good shape. But like there were times where he let himself get out of shape, like when he was making his comeback and he was obviously
Yeah.
older.
In like 78, 79, when Ali said, fucking, I'm not coming back, but then he got bored and decided to come back because all the money being thrown at him. Yeah, you have the magazines now since you bought like every single publication since 1970. And in a good way, I say that in a great way, man. You got as much access to anything as anybody does now, which is great. But
It's like almost embarrassing. But yeah,
but there's those photos again from Ali from 79 and 80. That was literally the Roper gut. Like but that was a real deal. There was like the fucking ridges on it and the wedges. Like my bro was big. And it's sad. I mean, we're not talking about that now, but like that's if you want to make like some kind of reference to like how much his stomach probably looked like, it wasn't that far ago. That was only 16 years that movie was made before then. So they probably looking at photos. Oh shit, look at Ali back then. We can make a belly like that.
well, and it's fucking sad to say, but that movie that was 16 years, and it's been fucking 30 years since the movie. So
Yeah.
we're getting old.
Totally.
But that just the whole weigh-in scene and whatnot just again adds extra division or whatever for all the opinions going into the fight, and for also people thinking like initially that it was a massive joke. Now Terry Conklin has knocked out the number one contender and showed up in shape,
Mhm.
so you know it makes.
Yeah, it's worked to their advantage. Now everybody's like super excited and
Yeah,
it's
and now it's all hyped
big.
up and everybody's all excited and shit like that. But then that sets up the end perfectly, which almost like when I was reading the reviews for it for the movie, because it wasn't reviewed super great. It wasn't reviewed awful, but it wasn't reviewed super great either. And the ones that were not very good were saying like it ends super abruptly, like the third act isn't very good. But that's kind of the whole point. At least I'm not trying to like make excuses for it, but that's the whole point of the movie is like to set up like this.
Well, that's what it's supposed to be. Yeah, they everyone because if you listen at one point during it, Sultan, Samuel Jackson Sultan goes up to Terry's trainer, well, in the very beginning of it, and I need you to make him credible. And he was like, I can make him credible. He was like, but then when he gets in the ring, he's dog meat. And the trainer goes, dog meat. Like they already know, like there's a written agreement between the two of
That's
them
the
that
whole
like,
point. Yeah.
yeah. And then at one point too, if you remember, because I think we did actually skip over this, like when we were talking about how the agreement of how Conklin and Jeff Goldblum's character were gonna like start working together. Um, Jeff Goldblum is talking to Terry's trainer initially before Terry comes over. He was like, "Oh, he's looking really good. Maybe, he was like, "Yeah." Then he was like, "Well, maybe he has a good chance when the fight happens." And then you see Terry's trainer go,
Yeah. He's like, good one, buddy. Good one.
yeah. Like you're like, "Oh, you fucking kidding me?" Like, he's gonna get killed. Like, you don't understand this? And his name is Mitchell in the movie, right? I keep on forgetting. Yeah, it's Mitchell. He was like he starts laughing. And at one point too, that's he says the same thing to he has a confrontation, not a confrontation, he has a meeting with Samuel L. Jackson initially before the fight. And he was like, wow, he's looking good. Champ might lose. He was like, man, no fucking way Champ loses this. It's a lock. He was like, you're starting to believe your own bullshit, which he was.
And even gets him kind of like snakily with the fucking lighter,
Oh
and he
yeah, with the lighter
holds him
gun.
up with
Yeah,
the gun,
yeah.
and it's just a lighter, and Jeff Goldblum's like, huh, you know.
And
But that's
he just laughed at
again
him.
just
Yeah.
reinforcing that his character is a snake, and he knows more than you, and he's got it over you. But Mitchell, Jeff Goldblum's character thinks he's got it. He thinks that he's got the secret. He's got the fucking insider
There's
track.
actually a lot of different fucking promoters over the years who make a inside trek into boxing and think they're gonna like become successful overnight. Whether it's celebrities or just people
Exactly.
with a lot of money. There was like, remember the example when in the 80s. I'm not going to go into the full story, but Larry Holmes and Harry Coetzee were going to unify the titles at one point. And it was from an outside promoter that no one had ever heard of. It was his first time into boxing. Guy had a fuck ton of money, and he thought he was going to be easy just because he had this and he was going to jump into it. And he was going out and making bombastic statements. King has nothing to do with this. This is my thing. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. But boom, 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 boom. Whole thing fell up in his face, and he ended up losing millions of it. And clearly, the fight never happened. That was that. Stallone and Tiger Eye, Magic Johnson trying to come up with a promotion, this one, that one. But just laundry list of them that you can go down the line with. But Jeff Goldblum was almost playing that character, looking back on it, of all those guys who think because they think they're smarter than the average person and they think they can outsmart a person that's been in the business for that long and more street smart than you'll ever be and just overall, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you think you're playing chess, but they're literally Bobby Fischer on you. They don't get that.
And that's exactly what it leads into, but it's kind of like a culmination where in the final scene everybody gets a whole bunch of comeuppance, like pretty much
Yeah.
everybody except for one character who's should be obvious. But it's I find it entertaining, obviously, because they set the whole thing up and like the crowd looks like it's mostly white and that there's a whole bunch of white people there to support Terry Conklin. They wheel the fictitious wheelchair kid in with like the Terry Conklin banner and shit like that. What's his name? Brian Setzer of the Stray Cats comes
Yeah.
in and sings Danny Boy with his guitar. And it's a big thing. Fucking Terry Conklin's waiting in the ring. And this shit always gets me because I still don't understand where he got this from or why it's the whole kiss the donkey. I'm gonna make him kiss the donkey. He's gonna kiss the like. What the fuck does that mean? I'm gonna make him kiss the donkey, ref. And Richard Steele's like, okay,
Yeah.
good.
And his trainer too, and his trainer going, okay, okay, but don't. He was like, try not to make him too mad, okay?
Yeah, like yeah. Hold on, don't get ahead of yourself.
He was
And
like, don't put
meanwhile,
too much, all right?
he's sitting there in the wing or in the ring having to wait because Roper's watching Dolomite.
I love that part. You know, he was like, I think he's scared of me. He was like, he's scared of me. He was like, maybe. Try not to make him too mad.
Yeah.
And
Which
he
is
said,
like
come up in here. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, he just keeps on yelling. And then
it's
I never
perfect.
understood the Dolomite scene either. Like, what was that as inspiration? Is this supposed to be
Well,
explained?
I think that's also I think it's supposed to be just an extra layer of satire because Dolomite was part of like the black exploitation era where for it's named that way for obvious reasons where a lot of black tropes and stereotypes were played up to an egregious and offensive degree in a lot of these movies. Shaft, fucking Dolomite, and then on top of that, like parodied on themselves and shit like that. And then so for a black heavyweight champion to take inspiration from that is just an extra level of like, what the fuck, dude? That's dumb. But, if given the character's age, he probably grew up with that shit, that type of shit. So that's
I
just an
just
extra layer of like, what the fuck, dude?
I just love that part when his trainer's like, yo, you need to cut this shit out. He's like, not until after the love scene. And then Dolomite comes walking in, and he looks like a fucking boss too. He has like a glass of cognac or something in his hand. You hear
Yeah,
the
he looks like a
oh,
quintessential like 70s pimp and shit.
shirt partly buttoned down, kind of sweating. He has that look. He's like really intense. Beautiful ass woman on the fucking bed with the lingerie leaning back, ready to be taken. And you hear like the disco ballad in the background. Not even. It was just like really, now here we are together, blinded by that. Like some ballad was playing, and you see him, he's like, he puts the glass down really slow, and then just, and then like, you try to kiss her, he just goes all, just goes south of the border right immediately.
Yeah, and then that's what gets Roper pissed is the
Something
fucking
he
they shut that
yells,
shit
yeah,
off.
because he yells something afterwards. He was like, you something eating motherfucker. And then
You
like whatever
rat
that is,
soup eating honky motherfucker.
and he's like, okay. Like that hits him, gets him mad. Gets his lackey. Guy runs over, grabs a cigarette out of his mouth.
And then he
No.
gets walked to the ring by Method Man.
Yeah. Oh, and you have to remember too, he slaps the reverend out of the way.
Yeah, he's like, may God, he's like, Please.
Yeah, he said, "Motherfucker, grow up," and shoves him out of the way. Like he palms him in the face and he keeps on walking.
Dude, it's a fucking great scene, bro. And
It is.
then,
The Method Man part's great too, because Method Man comes out there doing his song, and unlike him walking out Roy Jones, he actually performs the song for this time. Because I don't know what the fuck he did that time with Redman when they just sat there jumping around, but they didn't actually sing
yeah,
anything.
it was
Such a
like their presence, which was cool, but not as cool as if they'd actually done something.
Exactly. They just stood there. But anyways, yeah, he came out there and did, and this is like the height of Wu-Tang, mid 90s, 95, 96, like height of Wu-Tang, especially Method Man. And even I don't think I was that familiar with Wu as a kid because again, my mom was trying doing her best as like me not listening to that. But at the same time, I had older cousins and siblings and shit that were definitely trying to make me listen to it because they knew it
Yeah,
was the
I
good
probably would have
shit.
known like maybe a year or two after this.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't like bumping Wu-Tang, but definitely I loved when I heard Bring the Pain for the first time. And I heard it the first time on this, from this movie. And the way he comes out there, I bring the pain to town. And he's like bopping around and doing like the Method Man
Yep.
dance, being smooth, walks over, smacking off the hats of reporters and shit while he's walking by and just being a general dickhead, talking shit to people. And then, the fucking leprechauns are on the side that they go over. They start picking a fight with David Wade's crew where they start shoving him over. It was
It,
amazing.
yeah, like playing up the racial divide and playing up that, a whole bunch of these white people are ready for like a white champion and shit like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
And I
Which
mean,
have
like,
always been back then, man. They played it up during Holmes Cooney, and remember how they were
yep.
just like,
And
what?
the way that they, like, I mean, like, they don't actually waste too much time either. Like, they get right to the fight or whatever. They don't really, like, the
Oh,
pageantry and all that type of shit too, but then they get to the fight, which I guess I understand why people say like it ended abruptly or whatever. But like, they make it look for a moment like Terry Conklin's actually about to pull it off.
yeah. And it's funny too because they said it only lasts like 20 something seconds. Clearly, it lasts longer than what it did, but like it's it was funny too because like yeah, Roper comes out there fat as shit, clearly, whatever it may be, and then like Conklin does land that overhand right though because he was trainer yelling, "Watch the overhand right, watch the overhand." He's because I'm playing with him. Watch the overhand right, watch the overhand right. Then bop, he gets hit with that overhand right, and you see him go wobbling back
Yeah,
and
one of the best lines of the movie.
yep. And you know what's funny, Pat, is that like yesterday or the day before I watched Michael Greer, Larry Holmes again. I don't know what made me want to watch that, but I just wanted to put it on. And you know that scene at the end of it, well, this was during Larry Holmes' comeback around 1990 or so, 91. And that guy Greer muscular dude, but clearly not in the class of Holmes. He hurt Holmes a little bit, caught him with a combination. Holmes, not hurt him, but caught his attention, wobbled him back a little bit. Then he landed like 4 or 5 rabbit punches, and then backed up a little bit. And the referee warns him. And then Larry Holmes, in the most defiant looking thing, you just see him pissed off. He just drops his hands and he's like, "Really, motherfucker? Really? Like you
He's
just
like, "Oh, I was gonna let this go around, but
yeah."
not now."
Like you wanted to play that game? You really want to go there? Okay, buddy, gotcha. Walked up to him defiantly with his hands down, kept on staring at him. Bro, and the guy just fell unconscious. And it was almost kind of a similar thing, except Damian Wayans wasn't being rabbit punched. He just had, Terry Conklin had the temerity that punch him in the face with the right hand. And you want to embarrass me on TV?
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the, dude, you and I reference that like probably way more than we should. Oh, you're trying to embarrass me on TV. It's literally one of the best lines in the movie. Right when so Damon Wayans gets knocked back to the ropes and then with his mouth guard in, you trying to embarrass me on TV? And then fucking comes back and hits him with like an 8 piece and just fucking knocks him cold. And and probably the best shot of the movie is the kid with the fucking banner in the
Yeah,
wheelchair. Oh, Danny boy. And he fucking goes back into the song and shit. And what I pointed this out to you because I noticed it rewatching it the other day that right during that fucking sequence where Damon Wayans comes back and he's like, "Oh yeah," and starts like he's right about to knock him out. They start playing the chord progression from Mama Said Knock You Out. That
yeah, yeah.
da-na-na-na, da-na-na. Dude, when I noticed that, I was like, "Oh shit, that's great." One of those small little fucking Easter eggs in the movie that's fucking awesome. But like, the fact that it ends that way is like there's been all of this hype, everybody's been made to believe this shit, but then even out of shape and looking like shit, the champ just totally fucking handled. Yeah, he got hit once or whatever, but then he totally fucking handled the shit out of this white guy who was the best he could possibly be and hyped up and everything, blah blah blah. And that's it. But that's not the end of the movie, of course. And that's, like I was saying earlier, was kind of sets up the whole, in boxing they have the, oh well, if George Foreman defeated Joe Frazier and Joe Frazier defeated Muhammad Ali, obviously George Foreman should defeat Muhammad Ali because that's how the whole logic works in your head. But in boxing, it doesn't work that way. I mean, it might, it sometimes does, but not all the time. And styles make fights, et cetera, et cetera. So then, right after the whole fucking shit happens and Damon Wayans is like, look at that, I'm triumphant and blah blah blah. You get Shabazz jumps into the ring before anything could even fucking happen. Jamie Foxx brings Shabazz into the ring and pulls out like the most absurdly stupid large heater out of and he even says, he's like, if I could even get this out. He
Something
fucking
out of
pulls,
fucking Men in Black, seriously.
yeah, dude, it's like a fucking space gun and he fucking is trying to fucking do some shit. And then
And like yeah,
Damon,
Bernie Pacheco's ringside. We forgot to mention he was in
oh,
the
that's right. Yeah, that's true.
yeah.
Ferdy, and he was ringside earlier in the movie too
He
when he's
was. He
calling.
played. He's in a few parts of it. And Ferdy even goes. He jumps on. Oh no! He got a gun. He's got a gun. And like he's done it. He's under the ring. He's under the ring table with his announcer, and he's like, "Oh no!" Blah, blah, blah. And yeah, it's absolutely absurd that that part happens, and that's when Jamie Foxx is like, "Yeah, man, you know, you're supposed to give us another shot," and that's they start with the great one-liners again. He was like, "What's with that outfit?" Talking to Samuel Jackson Sultan. He's like, "What's with that outfit, man? Who you, Alibaba Jackson up in this motherfucker?"
And fucking Damon Wayans takes control and knocks Jamie Foxx out. Shot
Yeah,
goes off, and
and
then
then
they and then Shabazz gets to fight in Jamie Roper, and they start fucking fighting or whatever.
and
But
it's like
then
they had a go ahead.
no, go
They
ahead.
No, they had the funny, like Jamie Foxx had some fucking funny lines though before that too. He was like, "Yo, Sultan, man." He was like, "You were supposed to give us a title fight, man." He was like, "You fucked up. That's messed up." But like, he was like, "You need to respect that." And then when he called him Ali, and he was like, and then what did he say to him? He said Damien Wayans. He said, "Boy, you're sorry." He said, "That head looked like a half sunk milk dud." He said, "What you want?" Isaac Hedge said he's like Isaac Hayes said he wants his head back. He's like, "What's going on?" And then,
Well, and
and
mostly at that time he was known from fucking In Living Color too.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So
And
I
he was
mean,
one of
like,
those
he hadn't
one-liners.
really broken out yet like that.
I love that. He said Isaac Hayes said he wants his head back. He called him a half sunk milk dud with his head. And then, and then
Dad, you
fucking
ain't my daddy, are you?
yeah, exactly. Because Samuel Jackson's like, did I tell you gotta get your title shot? Did I? He's like, don't be yelling at me. You ain't my daddy, are you? Then yeah, that's when he gets sucker punched, and then the second fight breaks out, and you hear Ferdy go, "Oh no, there's a second fight going after the fight." And Samuel Jackson again has one of the best lines in the movie. It's something dumb. People would totally yell, "Guys, don't give away what we can sell." You know?
100%, dude. 100%. And fucking Shabazz gets the last word and fucking knocks Damon Wayans out and Damon Wayans goes back to one of his old fucking, I don't know if you ever seen his stand up from the early 90s, but he used to do a routine where he'd like talk about a bar fight and that it'd be like in a gay bar or something like that and like they'd be like dudes going "Ah,
Oh yeah, I know
ah," and shit.
that voice. Yeah, when he got
And he
knocked
does
out.
that voice when he gets knocked out and he's like throwing like the lamest fucking punches ever. And then
Yeah. Uh.
the
Yeah,
last great reference in the movie that I know of anyway is fucking right after Roper gets knocked out. Sultan steps over his body, which was, I'm guessing, a reference to when Don King did that after
totally.
George Foreman knocked out Joe Frazier. And Don King literally was like, boop, hello, Mr. Foreman. Fucking gotten his face for fucking all that shit. And I mean, again, is it a perfect movie? They end with Samuel L. Jackson's character Sultan addressing the camera, and I love you. It's like, dude, come on. This ends on the perfect note.
It did, especially with the way he did it, because that was definitely an homage to what Don King did, reference to Foreman and Kingston, Jamaica. But that part over too, because you see, and you can almost see the same thing because they almost said that that Don did the same thing. Is that he rode there with Frazier when he saw Foreman bounce him around, he had the same shocked look that he was just kind of like, "Holy fuck!" He did not expect that to happen, and immediately walked over him, grabbed him. Yeah, 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 I'm with you. He's mine, and started doing his whole act and all that. And you see the same thing with Sultan. He looks up, he's just like, "Oh my God," he couldn't believe to see the champ get knocked out. And even fucking Roper's Damian Wayne's boys over there, his three lackeys who had been throughout the film that
Damn.
yeah, they're like, "Damn, you okay, champ?" And then they ran off because they realized he got knocked out. Everyone just started like turning their back on him. And then yeah, Samuel Jackson runs up and he grabs fucking Marvin Shabazz and he was like, "You have just witnessed a preview of the magnificent fight between come
Always
between
ready to turn lemons into lemonade.
Malevolous." He called him Malevolous instead of Marvelous. He was like, "Malevolous." I love that nickname. Was that even fucking
Malevolent. Yeah.
Malevolent? He called it.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I thought he called him Malevolous. I didn't know Malevolent. What does it even mean?
Like evil.
Oh, yeah. He's like, "Malevolent, Marvin Shabazz, and James the Grim Reaper Roper. May the best man win. I love it. And I love you." And then he kisses him on the cheek, and you see the dude like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, dude. I guess if you're not a boxing fan or if you're not really getting all the references, I could see why you'd think it's a mediocre movie, but man, we love it. That's for sure. Because we even reference that shit just in regular conversation, dude.
I mean, it's just a funny, funny flick, man. And there's been other funny boxing movies since then, too. Play It to the Bone was a good movie in terms of if you don't take it seriously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You
And
can't take it as like a strict boxing movie.
no, and they actually and Play It to the Bone is actually loosely based on something that really did happen because in the movie Play It to the Bone, like correct me if I'm wrong, it's Antonio Banderas and who was the other one? Woody
Woody
Harrelson.
Harrelson, yeah.
And they're both old former contenders, kind of washed up, but they're going to fight each other and they're driving to the arena together to fight each other on one night. So like that's loosely based on something that kind of that happened a long time ago or something. But anyways, that's a funny movie if you watch it, and probably it's worth a rewatch for myself. But most boxing movies just aren't really funny like that. Like they don't really just spoof the sport the way. And honestly, since then, it's been like you said, 30 years. There hasn't been a boxing movie since then that's really like been able to spoof it or touch it, nor has anyone really tried to.
Probably the most acclaimed movie in boxing circles is probably Creed, which is good. It's a good movie. Like I'm cool with Creed. But then the most like, mainstream acclaimed movie was Million Dollar Baby. And you know how I feel about that fucking absolute
Not to tell
pile of
me, I
shit.
don't see that film. Yeah.
Absolute pile of shit, dude. Not well acted, not well
And
anything.
the other time is the only thing is that since then there's nothing like really a film based on boxing. I mean, there's been like well
Cinderella Man, which
yes,
was not
well
even
I'm
remotely
talking
accurate
about like
whatsoever.
well yeah, don't even get us on that. I'm talking about like everything's been biography based. There was The Boxer starring Daniel Day-Lewis around 1999 2000,
Yeah,
but
that's not a bad movie.
it's not a bad movie at all. But I'm saying that's an actual boxing film. Every other
Yeah.
boxing film has been like biography based more or less. Like you said, not Million Dollar Baby. Cinderella Man, where Max Baer is apparently a killer, and now people are trying to take that trope up until this day and age of still trying to promote that bullshit. The Pazienza movie, which I'm sorry, it's a great
It
story,
was
but
okay.
it's just not a
It was
good
all
movie.
right.
It wasn't good at all. And the Duran film, which again, like it probably out of all of those, it might be the best, but that's not really saying much at all, and not really a movie I'm.
Southpaw, the Jake Gyllenhaal movie where he's a left-hander or where he's a right-hander, but they call it
Oh God.
Southpaw. Yeah, it was
I've
good.
never even seen that to be honest. After I read that what it was supposed to be, I just never bothered with it. Nor I don't think I'm missing anything. But yeah, even up till this day, 30 years, it'll still hold up. The sport hasn't changed that much in the sense that what you can see in the Great White Hype still wouldn't remain true
Yep.
today. Like everything is still kind of remains the same. Boxing is still as lawless and stupid as it's always been. It's just different people now at the top of the helm trying to like proclaim themselves as king. You know what I'm saying? So.
Yeah, it's there are so many things in there that are basically timeless because of the nature of the sport. Because
Yeah.
boxing is inherently, for a number of reasons, dirty and icky. And I mean, its history is like, and this is coming from people who were like, immersed in it. We know we're not ignorant to what happens and what goes on, but that's part of the charm is that we know what's going on. We know it's fucked up. We're still here. And the only way for us to not be totally fucking torn apart by it in our head is to laugh at that shit because it's ridiculous. So that's also, I think what the movie at least partially provides is it's a safe haven to laugh at it, to see all the ridiculous shit and just be like, wow.
Yeah, I mean, totally. And when you see these characters and you can think about it in real time, you're just like, wow, they're not that far ahead of that. Like Samuel Jackson plays a person that you would totally see as a boxing promoter, even as
Yep.
Don King. He's not being that much over the top because King says more of the same shit that he kind of does and all this stuff and the way they're centuries and all that. Totally. All the, like we mentioned Cheech's character and how much he was in relation to Bob Lee and Jose Suleiman and probably Gilberto Mendoza and all that. That's spot on. The guy, like you said, the people that were involved in this film clearly were boxing fans and knew what they were doing, and I think they had a hit with this. So, yeah, I enjoy it.
Yeah, I'd say thank you for doing the homework, but it's like easy. You just watch a movie and it's a fucking fun movie to watch.
Totally. And it's still just good today. And I'm glad my parents weren't that strict about me watching it. Because, like, I used to rent it. And then the soundtrack, too, just I'll say that really quick. The soundtrack was really banging on that
Yeah.
movie. Like, you had Cooley High, you had Method Man is on that, Jamie Foxx and Dolomite doing
E40, yep.
40, Lou Rawls is on it. Um, fuck, I feel like I'm missing someone big over here. Oh, Bone Thugs and Harmony would shoot 'em up. Um, that song "We Got It" at the end of it. We
Yep.
got it. It's a really good soundtrack, especially for the mid '90s.
Yeah,
It's
for
on
sure.
Pandora right now, and it's fucking well, Spotify for that matter, not Pandora. It's on Spotify, and it's stupid because there's only like 3 or 4 songs from the entire soundtrack on it. Everything else is like blanked out. So at that point, what's the point of even having it on there? You're
That's
better off.
that they do that shit when there's a lot of songs that have like collabs and shit, dude, that like the rights are weird and it's fucking dumb.
And it's
But
ridiculous. So I mean, like, cool. All right, like I can get the Cooley High song that I can get. Not Cooley High. Fucking. Well, it's not Cooley High. What was that band I said?
do I think it is Cooley High?
No, the name of the song was Cooley High.
Or oh fuck.
Yeah, man. Hold up.
Yeah, that had to be like 90 fucking
Hold up,
oh
man. I
shit.
got their fucking vinyl too. This is a Genie song. Camp
Yeah,
Low. That
Camp
was a
Low.
Camp Low. Yeah, I'm an idiot. My bad. Camp Low. I was
Yeah,
calling them
Biz
Cooley High.
Marquis
Yeah,
on that shit. Insane
Camp
Clown
Low.
Posse.
That's right. They are on that.
It's
Yeah,
fucking ridiculous.
Camp Low. I mean, I love Camp Low too, so I feel bad that I feel like an idiot that I didn't know that. But it's a great soundtrack overall, everything, and
Yeah.
worth a watch. So I'm glad we got to do this today.
Yeah, man. Everybody, I know is a little bit different as far as the show today and the content that we usually do, but I
We
don't know.
still got some history in there.
It's still boxing, it's still history. Deal with it. You'll be all right. We'll be back with some other shit soon, I'm sure. Eris, I appreciate you, bro. Thanks so much. And thank you, everybody who listened in. If you did listen in, subscribe on the podcast, rate it. If you watched on YouTube, thank you. Subscribe, give us a comment, etc. And we'll talk soon, Eris. Probably again about this movie.
Sounds good. Have a
All
good
right,
one.
man.